Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of What If Naruto Became Serious During Chunin Exam. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 5. Resonating. To Naruto, names meant everything. It is a big part of a person's individuality. To him, it gave a person an identity, not just someone who could easily be discarded as a faceless drone. He learned that names meant something really important. After all, when you grow up and all you have is your own name, then it meant that in some form, you exist in the world. When he was younger, the old Hokage mentioned to him once that the first word that came out of his mouth was his own name. Not mama, not papa, but his own. He learned at a much later date compared to kids his age and gradually spoke on his own, learned how to communicate on his own. Naruto grew up from the streets, surviving in his own way and lived in it. From day one that he could remember, nobody called him by his name. People always mentioned him in passing as it. Not exactly a very humane term given to him. To be called like an object shook him terribly in fury. He hated it. And so he valued his name. He valued a person's name too if he liked them enough, because he liked being treated like anybody else, like he's human. And he loved giving nicknames even more, because to him, those nicknames meant that he was close and the person grew on him. He liked stuff like that. So when Naruto learned of Kurama's name, he couldn't stop mentioning it once he and the fox had a conversation once again. Hey, Kurama, don't call me that. I never gave you permission to call me by that name. The fox said irritably, but Naruto simply scoffed at it. How long have I been out, Kurama? And promptly ignored what the fox had said earlier. Don't ask me. Whatever you see, I see. Your perception is connected to mine. Now stop bothering me. Hey Kurama. For the umpteenth time, the Biju just growled at the blonde in hostility. The fox tried, several times in fact, to ignore Naruto when he called him by his real name. Now Naruto simply wouldn't stop pestering him ever since. Even when he knew he pulled his ears down and closed, Naruto still pestered him to no end. It got to a point that he just gave up and let the brat did the talking between them even if he knew it wouldn't stop. Once he gets out of this prison, the first thing he was going to do was wail on Shukaku for being an idiot. What? The fox asked. Naruto noted that Kurama was getting pretty annoyed at his constant pestering. Not that he could have stopped, but he'd been stuck here for a while with nothing to do. Training was out of the question because whatever the hell he gains here, wouldn't necessarily carry over to his own body. Who gave you your name? Now that was a question that slightly caught Kurama off guard. It took him back when he was just a young kid. A sense of longing, a feeling thought long gone, came to him all of a sudden. He looked down at the brat before him that was eyeing him curiously. My father gave me that name. Naruto looked surprised at that. The fox had a parent. That was something. His surprise turned to a smile as he asked the fox. What was your father like? For that matter, what was it like to have a parent? The fox could only growl at his container as he said, don't you have other things to do? Why don't you just try to get out of here? The boy answered him, if I could get out, I could have done that ages ago, Kurama. There was him using his name again. It irritated the fox to no end. Naruto was about to ask Kurama another question when he felt himself being pulled out by something. Well, looks like I'll be going out sooner than I thought. Good riddance. Come on, you don't mean that, Kurama. I told you to stop using my name. And then, the blonde was out. Kurama huffed in his cage as he began to slumber. All the while, he thought to himself. It's gotten too quiet all of a sudden. Naruto slowly opened his eyes and he could see the ceiling above his head was completely white. He could immediately smell the antiseptic as it wafted through his nose. He scowled. He was in the hospital again. Feeling that he could sit up, Naruto did so and noticed his sensei, Kakashi, sitting beside the door and reading his favorite book. He decided to call his sensei's attention. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto answered, holding his head with his right hand. He could feel a slight headache escaping him at the moment. Ah, Naruto, you're awake. It was strange that you could have slept so long. Usually it only takes you several hours to get back on your feet. Your chakra must have been pretty low for you to have been knocked out like that. How long was I out? Naruto asked. Kakashi closed his book as he looked at the blonde and said, "You've been out for 3 days. Sakura is with Sasuke. Both of them are training as of now. I'm just a shadow clone. I'll be disappearing shortly to let the original know you're awake. I wouldn't advise you to move though. The medic nin here had to make sure you didn't have any bone fragments circulating your body. That would have caused problems." Naruto flinched when he heard that, remembering he had his ribs crushed from his battle with Gaara. Though there was no lingering pain, Naruto's body could recall of being subjected to such, that's why he flinched. "What happened after I was out?" the boy asked. The clone of Kakashi looked at the boy and answered with a question too. "What do you want to hear first, the good news or the bad news?" Naruto looked at the man and thought about it. After a few seconds, he answered his teacher. "The bad news first, Kakashi-sensei, if that's okay." Kakashi looked down, a look of sadness in his eyes as he was about to break it to his student. The Sandaime Hokage died during the invasion of Suna and Oto. A memorial service will be offered to him in 2 days along with the rest of the shinobi who died in the attack. A chord struck to him when his sensei mentioned of the old man's death. Something that brought his spirits down just as he was recovering as his hands slowly clenched to a fist. Kakashi could imagine how hard it was for Naruto to take in the news. Hiruzen was like a grandfather to him. When no one else would take notice of the boy, the Hokage was the one who guided him. Compared to many others in the village, Hiruzen was the first to listen to Naruto and actually acknowledge him as a member of Konoha. Naruto owed Hiruzen many things, including the chance to learn how to read and write. It was a miracle that the old man could spend time with him even if it was limited when compared to running a village. A pained expression escaped his face. He closed his eyes to stop the overwhelming grief from taking over even if barely. What happened? Kakashi soon explained what happened during the time that they were pursuing Gaara to the time he was brought to the hospital along with the rest of the injured genin during that mission. Naruto wanted to get out. He wanted to take a walk. At least to have some time and sorted himself out. I want to take some time for myself, sensei. The clone nodded, but before he vanished, he told Naruto. I heard from one of the judges of the exam. Naruto, you did an excellent job during your match with Neji, and as of now while we still don't have a new Hokage, they are naming you an unofficial Chunin until your rank has been certified by the new Hokage. Even with that news, Naruto's mood never seemed to let up as Kakashi vanished in a cloud of smoke. He knew for a fact that if anyone can pull through from anything, then it would be his student. With Shikamaru. Shikamaru knew something was up when he saw Naruto confined to a different room compared to Ino and Choji who were hospitalized and confined to the same room. He noticed the difference too, when most of the staff that were assigned to Naruto's care were always the same faces around the clock. To note, he noticed 3 people wearing the same hospital uniform entering and leaving Naruto's room. What surprised him was that no one was allowed entry into the room, even the most prestigious clan heirs such as Sasuke and Hinata to visit. Only Team 7's Junin sensei was allowed to even enter the room, and even then, his hours were extremely limited. Shikamaru, how long are you going to look like something's up? Are the results for the Chunin exams already in? His female teammate had cut his thoughts short when she asked those questions. Not one to remain thinking of this conundrum for long, he answered. No, the results were not given. I heard from Asuma sensei that if they were going to base the scores on the fights for the 3rd exam alone, then only 2 made it as Chunin. That doesn't include the peer recommendations though, so I'm inclined to believe that they'll only promote those 2 people to Chunin. Ino then asked him, do you know who they are? Shikamaru shrugged, can't say. Everyone's tight-lipped about the whole thing. They never even explained to us the criterion needed to pass during the exam. So I'm guessing that Naruto and Sasuke will be the ones to get the promotion. If it were an earlier statement, Ino would have laughed at the possibility of Naruto being Chunin before her. But based on what she'd seen in his fight against Neji, the one rumored to be the strongest genin in the current batch of examinees in Konoha, Ino was inclined to believe that Naruto would have the possibility to be promoted. Beaten by the class dead last, I guess Naruto isn't joking around when he said he'd be Hokage. A state of melancholy overwhelmed her as Shikamaru raised a lone eyebrow at this before he decided to cut off Ino's depressing train of thought early. Anyway, I just came to inform you guys about the memorial service 2 days from now. Choji is already going to be discharged by tomorrow while you wait for yours today. Asuma-sensei and our dads can't be here because of an emergency meeting with the Chunin forces. Ino nodded at that with a sad face. Their Hokage died from the invasion. It stood as a testament that even the strongest men perish in battle given the chance. It made Ino realize how fleeting their lives were and how important gaining strength is. Naruto-kun, you're not supposed to be out of bed right now. Get back here this instant. Well, at least there was a ray of sunshine in these dark clouds. Maybe the blonde was available for visiting today, finally. When he arrived at Naruto's room, he heard one of the nurses shouting vehemently at the blonde while he was groaning. You get out of bed again and I'll nail your hands and feet with stakes, you hear me? She said in an exclamation point. When Shikamaru entered the door, he saw Naruto quivering in fear as the nurse looked back at him. Yes, Junko-san, I won't sneak out of bed again. The nurse simply clicked her tongue, as if you'd do that anyway. You're in bed for a reason, Naruto-kun. You're injured. We can't have you moving around until we know you're perfectly fine. But I am now. The nurse named Junko lightly bopped him on the head. At least it didn't hurt compared to Sakura's. Naruto rubbed that part of his head. Until you're cleared, we'll presume as you're still injured. It's part of the job. Naruto sighed as he slumped in his bed and then asked Shikamaru, what are you doing here, Shikamaru? The nurse left after that saying that Naruto could now take visitors just in time. Just wanted to check what the noise was all about. Still stirring up trouble, I see. He asked with a smile. Naruto huffed at that and crossed his arms while looking at another direction. I just wanted to go upstairs, it's not like I'm sneaking out of the hospital. Shikamaru grinned at that. If it makes you feel better, Junko-san, was it? She was only looking out for you. Naruto mumbled something about monster nurses and their sadistic streak in not allowing him any ramen. Anyway, Naruto, I came here because I wanted to ask you something. Shikamaru mentioned. This was it. This was the moment of truth that he wanted. He didn't want to be kept in the dark any more than Naruto did. But he felt this was a sensitive topic to Naruto, so he added as an assurance. If you're not up to it, then it's fine if you don't answer, I just want to learn the truth. By this time, Naruto had stopped his grumbling and turned serious as to what Shikamaru had said now. What was it that made him so edgy today? Now smack me one if I'm wrong here, Naruto, because what I'm about to ask is a bit accusatory. I'm sorry if you think it's wrong of me. Shikamaru. Naruto stopped Shikamaru's statements dead in his tracks. What? He asked. I get it. You don't need to ramble on. Naruto answered, resting his head on a pillow and stared up at the ceiling once more. I saw what happened during your fight with Gaara. I want to ask, are you really the container of the Kyuubi no Yoko? That question threw Naruto off guard. His eyebrows immediately raised and he immediately sat up. What? Naruto asked. It was the only thing he could think of at this situation. However, much as he tried to deny it, Shikamaru could already tell that he was right on the money with that question. I was just asking. I saw the fight, I felt the chakra and I read the books. Biju are huge quantities of chakra. I remember Iruka-sensei saying once that chakra can never truly disappear, only changed in nature, much like energy as a whole. With that thought alone, I've read the books about Biju and they confirm that these beasts are actually really just a massive collection of chakra given sentient form. Naruto sighed and fell back on his bed. That fight with the Shukaku really was a damn giveaway. What are you going to do if I am the container? Naruto asked. Shikamaru never once looked away and answered truthfully. It told Naruto that he wasn't lying. I'm not going to lie to you, Naruto. There are people that are after you. Rather, they are after the thing that's inside you within the village. I need to know what I'm up against and what I'm expected to have in order to stop the guy who's going to turn you into a mindless weapon or treat you like an expendable tool. Fuck, this was like Jiraiya telling him about those creeps that were after him about a month ago. Naruto, in exasperation, buried his head under his pillow and cursed multiple expletives that would make a sailor weep. Naruto then sat up again and said to his visitor, do you have a name on the person who was hell-bent in making me their lapdog? Shikamaru nodded. The man's name is Danzo. Shino's dad said that this person would stop at nothing to gain control over you and have enough pieces to have the village. To him, you're probably a significantly bigger piece than most. I talked to my dad about this and he says that if Danzo gets a hold of you, he gets a hold on Konoha. I'm inclined to agree with him at this point. So what do you want me to do about it? Naruto asked, looking serious. Just a few hours awake and already he's facing problems left and right. For now, nothing. We still have time. The Chunin force can hold him off with my dad being the strategic commander and two of the senior council are not considering Danzo as Hokage for the moment. But it won't be long until we can find a suitable candidate for Godime. Shikamaru replied. Naruto nodded. That seemed reasonable at least. He could always count on Shikamaru for these long-term goals. Do the others know that I'm the container? Naruto asked. This time he looks outside the window and saw the scenery of his own village behind a glass wall, a familiar sight that he remembered, when he first saw the village from the window of his apartment, completely alone. So far, only Hinata and I know this. I figured you were the container when Asuma-sensei blurted out the word, Jinchuriki. What my mistake was letting Hinata hear what I had deduced at the time. How did she react? Naruto was more concerned about what his friends thought about his situation. Shikamaru simply shrugged. It was vague, but I could hear crying when she heard about it. She didn't look like she was going to have a panic attack over it, as if she had more or less an idea, but didn't quite add up for her. It was the same for him too, but he figured it out after that horrible fiasco between the sand and sound. Naruto could only reply to his friend, you know, for someone like me who's been made fun of and looked down on in life, I always wondered how I could make friends. I'm bad at it. Hell, parents had their kids shooed me out just at the mere sight of me. I got lucky, though. If Iruka-sensei hadn't noticed me, I could have been like Gaara. He was angry at the world, he had nothing and he was looking forward at nothing. Then I've made friends, the closest that I've got to a connection with people. I worked hard, trying to get here. His left hand held a tussle of his blonde hair at the top of his forehead as he slowly pulled down. But the thought of yanking that away from me, I can't bear the thought of it. His eyes closed in frustration as Shikamaru remained silent, he knew his friend was frustrated. Old man Hokage died, it's painful enough but the thought of being left behind, that's even worse. So, I'm happy that you would stick your neck out for me, Shikamaru, I'm happy that Hinata could relate to me. Shikamaru stood up, nodded at Naruto as he left. Now, more than ever Shikamaru was decided. He would try to make things less hard for his friend. A tear escaped his left eye as he closed his door. Damn that antiseptic. Team 7. Everything changed since that last mission. At least that's what Kakashi could tell. He saw Sakura and Sasuke that day, demanding answers as to what Naruto had done. The army of clones, the red chakra, the summoning and the change of the giant toad to a giant nine-tailed fox. Of course Kakashi had to stop them then and there. State secrets like that were to remain a secret for a good reason. Then again, from what they described, it was hard to find ways to cover up Naruto's actions. Even so, that deserved commendable praise besides the fact that Naruto's status as the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko was slowly being compromised. He knew he couldn't answer any of the questions that Sakura and Sasuke had thrown his way, but he can at least provide a better solution. If you want answers, then you have to be the ones to ask Naruto. Those questions are rather personal, and I can't pry into any more personal life choices or I'll be considered a meddler. With that last statement, Kakashi glared at Sasuke. He was glad he was only a shadow clone right now in the training grounds or else he wouldn't stand the continuous barrage of questions. By the second hour of their training, they had already shut up about the whole thing. Of course that didn't mean that one of them had approached and asked. I want to take a leave and go out of the village for a while. Kakashi raised an eyebrow at this, why exactly? To retrieve a summoning contract. Ah, that made sense. Sasuke saw the particular results of a summoning contract in his hands. And why would you look for a summoning contract? Sasuke turned his back to his teacher and corrected the man, not look, get. The Uchiha clan had multiple hideouts and warehouses in Fire Country, some of them are still operational. My father took me once on a trip to one of the warehouses. The stockpile of weapons, armory, and sometimes jutsu scrolls are in there. I can get that summoning contract if I so wish it to. I doubt you can find summoning contracts that are on that level of scale though, Sasuke. Those things are a rare kind. If you want, I can have Anko share her summoning contract with you. Kakashi was pertaining to the giant battle that occurred a few days ago. Sasuke was looking to the general area where Naruto and Gaara had their bout. I want to grow stronger, Kakashi. I don't want to fall behind. The Uchiha continued. I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, I suggest you read the scroll I've given you. Come back here tomorrow and we'll see how we can improve your Sharingan. With that, Sasuke simply left as Sakura looked on to her only teammate right now as she was about to perform the water walking exercise. Once Sasuke was gone from earshot distance, Sakura had approached their teacher with concern in her voice. Sensei, I think Sasuke-kun is upset over to what happened earlier. Kakashi raised an eyebrow at this. Honestly, I expected worse. What's with his demeanor all of a sudden? I think Shikamaru talked to him about Naruto having problems on his own. He never said specifically what it was, but I'm assuming that it involves the village. The way Shikamaru kept telling that he couldn't trust the adults after what happened. Kakashi couldn't blame the boy. Asuma had told him what happened a day after the invasion and alarm bells rang in Kakashi's head. Thankfully, Shikamaru wasn't spreading the word, instead he'd been thinking objectively at it. He was glad that Asuma's student understood, to say the least, of the situation. That didn't mean that the boy liked it. Sasuke will figure it out eventually. I just hope that when he does so with an open mind. Kakashi then let Sakura resume her training and gave her 2 scrolls to study. He had hastily crafted a team in pursuit of the Tsunade Jinchuriki. He was wrong on that part, but more importantly, he was further inclined to train his students after those events. Hearing that they almost died brought chills to his spine. He didn't want a mistake like that ever happening again. He didn't want these children experience what he had and hoped that in the near future, he could forgive himself for such a mistake. As it stood, even if they were already exposed to the harsh realities of the ninja world, they were still wet behind the ears and have very little chance of surviving if they want to continue down this path. It's time I stop slacking off. The daimyo's palace, Fire Country. Shikaku had been fidgety for the last few hours. He's been told that the restoration efforts were being held off for a few more days and shinobi were being deployed from every possible corner of Fire Country for surveillance. At least Ibiki and the rest of the clan heads had begun doing their work back home. He thought. He was left to deal with the current situation at hand. To his left, he saw Udatane Kaharu, an old teammate of Hiruzen, and Mitokado Homura, another teammate of the late Sandame. These two were the senior members of Hiruzen's council. Perhaps Hiruzen's most trusted members. Though the three had differing views on how to run the village, both of them respected Hiruzen's decisions in ruling. The furthest to his right, though, was the man he wasn't willing to put his trust into, considering his shady dealings, even if it were, as he would have said, for the good of the village. True, many of his operations have been a benefit to the village, but at the same time, this man was suspected of covering up many of Orochimaru's experiments. It was just one out of the multitude of backdoor dealings that were associated to him. Shikaku didn't need to be a genius to figure out that Danzo was hungry for the position of Hokage. A position that neither the elders nor he would simply just allow. Soon the daimyo of the country had entered the room, waving a fan and looking rather distraught at what just happened in the events that led up to now. To both of his sides were his advisors, the keeper of the chest and the scribe. The urgent looks on their faces told all. Once the meeting had begun, Shikaku knew now that there was no backing down from these talks. I'm saddened by the fact that Hiruzen perished in this attack. One could not foresee this event happening at all. The daimyo had mentioned. A staunch critic of Hiruzen, Danzo was first to speak. It should have been, though, daimyo-sama. Hiruzen has a weak conviction when he didn't end his student's life then and there. After you had cleared all evidence of your involvement, I don't think you'd be one to talk. Shikaku thought, but baseless arguments and rumors have no place in this meeting hall. It was better reserved at the wet market where all people, men and women alike, like to tell tall tales. And he had high hopes for that student of his too, a shame indeed. The daimyo said, shaking his head. I would suggest that we get to the point of this meeting, daimyo-sama. We are not here to criticize on what has occurred, but rather on what to do to prevent these kinds of scenarios in the near future. Shikaku had suggested. Danzo had coughed a little, subtly showing his disdain. The daimyo nodded as he folded his fan and pointed to his two advisors. Yes, quite. Adaki, Masaichi, if you would please. As of now, the country is willing to give an extra boost in restoration for any damaged part of the village. The budget has already been filled out and the damage has been estimated, we just need an authentication to get started. The keeper of the chest said as he looked at his clipboard. As it stands, the proper documents have been signed and we are awaiting the go signal coming from the village itself. Though I'm sure the 2 senior councilmen from Konoha would suffice in filling out the forms. What concerns me is the future transaction that will likely happen after the initial action. We cannot have Homura Dono or Kaharu Dono alternate between approvals for aid, that would be problematic for our logistics division. We'll need a constant if you will. To what the scribe was pertaining, that meant a new Hokage. Which brings us to the next part. Who are our candidates to take the seat of Hokage? The daimyo had cut off. The people from Konoha managed to look at each other except for Danzo who remained silent at it. As of now, we are coaxing one of Hiruzen's students, the Toad Sage Jiraiya, to take the mantle. But he is still rather busy in maintaining our information network across the globe and we need his skills there. If we are to fail in convincing, perhaps we will, Kaharu answered first but was stopped by Danzo. Are you also blind as to accept such a man who also studied under Hiruzen to take charge? Danzo had decided to speak now. Shikaku raised a brow at this. Jiraiya of the Sannin has proven that he is a very capable candidate. His information network is vital for the village, and his display of skill is no laughing matter. Do not forget that he taught the Yondaime Hokage. Shikaku replied. Danzo huffed and continued. I do not trust such a man to make good as Hokage. He is not fit. He will only continue the same path as what Hiruzen has done all those years ago. Besides, as you said, his information network is vital to the village. He is better suited at the field than at the seat giving orders. Then I suggest a continuation of this meeting at a later time to decide. Homura had cut in. Danzo did not seem pleased at all. Do you not have a candidate in mind to take over as Hokage other than Jiraiya of the Sannin? Asked the daimyo. That we do, daimyo-sama, but like Danzo Dono has stated, we are having second thoughts because of the importance of Jiraiya's network. We will discuss matters accordingly after and see the viable candidates for the position of Hokage. Kaharu had added in. She looked at Danzo who had looked away in displeasure. Konoha needs to react and appear strong as immediately as possible. A leaderless village will undoubtedly. Danzo was cut off when Shikaku had butted in. The candidates that are to be chosen should not be done in haste, Danzo-san. The matter of selecting a Kage is a very serious one. We cannot just place one out of a knee-jerk reaction just to keep the other countries at bay. We need to be cautious on who we select. The daimyo nodded at this and inquired a vote. All in favor of continuing this meeting at a later date. Many of the hands in the room were raised. Few had their hands down, including Danzo's. Then this meeting for now is adjourned. Elders of Konoha, please begin looking for appropriate candidates. I would not mind if it takes a month, but more than that, then Jiraiya shall become Hokage by default of inquiry. Shikaku sighed in relief when Danzo left the meeting hall, no doubt scheming further and further behind their backs. He knew he just had to be ready. When the old war hawk left, the daimyo and his advisors soon followed and went their own ways. Well, you heard him, Shikaku, we have a month to settle this matter. It pains me to say this but Danzo is right on one thing. But we cannot select him as Hokage, not with all the suspicions being held against him. Homura mentions as he stands from his seat as does Kaharu. Both of them were about to leave the room when Shikaku followed. The elders were advising Shikaku to keep the Chunin as of now in high alert and told him to keep Danzo at bay for as long as necessary. The commander of Chunin forces didn't seem all too thrilled at the prospect of such a daunting task. Troublesome. Konoha. Dark clouds gathered throughout Fire Country. Rain was slowly pouring down as people slowly gathered around the memorial service for the fallen shinobi who died from the invasion a few days ago. A somber feeling escaped within the village. The sense of mourning lingered in the air. All the shinobi were carrying flowers for the dead as well as wearing all black for the occasion. 2 days had passed and the civilians noticed many of the familiar shinobi faces that were still living that day. All were wearing black. Some of them still had bandages or gauze plastering their faces as they began to line up for the memorial service being held towards the Sandaime Hokage and the shinobi that were killed in action for the past few days. Naruto had looked to his side as Iruka was holding Konohamaru who was sobbing as hard as he could. Many of the shinobi had blank faces. He saw Sasuke staring at the memorial with glazed eyes. He could tell that he was reliving something. Sakura was at his side noticing Sasuke's expression until it turned back to being the same as that of any other shinobi. When it was finally time to offer flowers to the dead, the shinobi began to form a single file and one by one, they offered flowers to the dearly departed. When Naruto had stopped by Tsunade Hokage's picture and offered his flower, a memory had brought him back to a time when he was nothing more than a child with the wildest of dreams and looking at the sunset above the monument of the Hokages. Surely, a boy like you has dreams for the future, right? I don't know, old man. I don't have one. Then what do you wish? Someone who cares, old man. That's all I wish in my life. That we do all, my boy, that we do all. Why not become a ninja, Naruto-kun? I'm sure you'll have the talent to become one. You really think so, old man? Most of the time, people call me an idiot when I couldn't read the more complex words. Then why don't I teach you? I'm sure this old man can have time to be himself once in a while. Naruto was clenching his teeth now as he closed his eyes in pure mortification. His fists were closed tight as he looked down, trying to suppress those memories for a moment. He didn't want to cry in front of so many people. He wasn't like that. Iruka-sensei, what does it mean for a shinobi to die? The scar-faced Chunin could only look at the memorial in a frown as he answered the boy, shinobi die in rather simple ways. They carry with them the hopes and dreams of loved ones. When shinobi die, all that is left with the people left behind is anguish and sorrow. But Sandaime-sama taught me something. He taught me that in death a shinobi can pass on their will. That the greatest hour of a ninja lies in his death, and through that, he can fan the flames of those willing to continue his will. Sandaime-sama died knowing his will is passed on to the next generation, someone to continue what he had started. Naruto was clenching his fist still, trying to contain himself, but it still hurts in losing those people that you care for the most. To his side, Sasuke heard what Naruto had said and he was the one to continue. That's the pain of losing someone. When the people that you love die, you are left with nothing but holes in your heart. It can never truly be filled again, because they've touched our lives. Things that we can never truly replace, only remembered. Sasuke knew that all too well. He wondered why, but he felt compelled just to say those words to his teammate. It never gets better, does it? The blonde asks, and the Uchiha could only give a solemn shake of his head. No, it doesn't. Candid as it was, it felt appropriate for the occasion. At the back of the crowd, on a tall building, Jiraiya leaned against the wall and recalled a conversation with his former teacher as the flowers were being offered one by one. Flashback. Jiraiya sat on a stone in the middle of a creek as he watched his sensei teaching them how to walk on water. It was one of these moments that Sarutobi Hiruzen liked to be technical about many aspects on chakra while Tsunade and Orochimaru took down notes. Jiraiya never took those notes to heart though, believing that he wasn't cut out for such highly technical and abstract in his lectures about chakra. Jiraiya, what have I told you about the importance of these lectures? Hiruzen asked, voice stern and full of exasperation from his wayward student. That every concept is important to understand. Jiraiya repeated with a drone-like voice. Hiruzen sighed and called over his student to sit beside his teammates. Jiraiya felt like protesting. No way am I going to sit next to gloomy Orochimaru or flat-chested Tsunade. That earned a few rocks flying at his way courtesy of his short-tempered teammate. What did you call me, you perverted sleazebag? Flat as an ironing board, Petenko Tsunade. It didn't help that Orochimaru was finding the whole conversation amusing with that creepy laugh of his. More rocks flew at his way as Jiraiya casually dodged them like he had been doing for most of his life, which was, in fact, true considering his tendencies to peep on the women's side of the bath at the hot springs. Hiruzen had to put a stop to them before things got out of hand. Tsunade looked like she was about to hurl a boulder. When things quieted down, Hiruzen had all three of them demonstrate the water walking exercise which Tsunade and Orochimaru had done flawlessly, leaving behind a Jiraiya completely soaking wet. Now it was Tsunade's turn to make fun of her teammate who was glaring at her while Hiruzen looked at his student with an amused look. Not so easy and simple now, is it? He asked. Jiraiya huffed and turned his head sideways. Small things like this shouldn't bother me in becoming a great ninja. He rationalized. Hiruzen shook his head and dismissed his two students. Jiraiya was once more left with Hiruzen for further training. Jiraiya, what am I going to do with you? He asked rhetorically. Jiraiya didn't speak after that, knowing full well of his sensei's disappointment. Hiruzen then leaned down and grabbed a small pebble and with dexterous hands, threw it onto the shallow water of the creek into the deeper parts of the river. He had an idea to help Jiraiya, he just hoped that the boy took it to heart. Lectures are there for you to know, Jiraiya. I am not teaching things that are useless. These are things that should matter because one small decision can impact a huge outcome. The teacher grabbed one more pebble and threw it once more. The stone skipped again, this time, ending at a much further distance. Take that pebble for example. The stone creates ripples, ripples that start small and gradually surge, becoming larger and larger until it becomes a wave. Jiraiya by now, frustrated and soaked to his bone, just sat beside his teacher and watched as the man threw another stone and it skipped over the water. Whenever his sensei talks like this, he felt the urge to listen and be compelled. Much like how life is, things are always uncertain. It's those decisions, the little piece of detail that creates ripples and impacts the future. Soon, everything changes. The teacher looked at his student and then gave him a pebble. He was asking Jiraiya to join him. The boy complied and took the pebble with a grin. We can't get by in our lives when we don't encounter these small ripples. Because if we don't, then we stop growing, we stop being what we aim to accomplish. You can always get away with that boast of yours that you are strong. But boasting about your strength and actually backing up your words are different matters altogether. When Jiraiya threw the pebble, it only bounced 3 times before it completely sunk. He dropped his head in shame at just how good Hiruzen was at this game of his. The teacher laughed and the student sulked. For every ripple that we create more challenges, more tests to prove our worth, and more decisions to be made. It's what makes humans so dynamic. It's what makes us unique as we are. Do you know that old saying, Jiraiya? We are who we choose to be. The man smiled as Hiruzen put a hand on his student's shoulder. And you are who you will choose to be. So what should you choose? Jiraiya smirked as he said to his teacher, become a great ninja and write super erotic novels. Sarutobi was taken aback at this and then added, there you go again, Jiraiya, you should be serious about this. I am serious, sensei. And don't talk to me about old habits. You come with me from time to peep on the women's side of the bath too. You even said my concealment jutsu was the greatest. Sarutobi had promptly silenced his student at that, all the while hiding the blush on his face. Hiruzen was as much of a pervert as Jiraiya was, that much was certain, the keyword being, was. Flashback end. Jiraiya had a smirk on his face as he recalled those memories of his. It was probably one of his most enlightening moments with his former teacher, and damn it to hell if Sarutobi didn't like his novels. Those books were always hidden under the old man's desk, for crying out loud. He looked down once again to the gathering of shinobi and noticed that people were already starting to leave. He looked down and saw Naruto that was heading for his team. He didn't run, it was a solemn walk as he walked towards them, perhaps to help around for the coming restoration effort on the village. A few more days passed and life was slowly turning back to normal for Konoha. People were going out again, this time repairing the damages dealt during the invasion. Stalls were set up for commercial establishments destroyed by the giant snakes that ran amok on the village. Shinobi were helping out with many of the tasks that the civilians could not do. Team 7 wasn't an exception to this rule, either. Naruto and Sasuke were carrying planks of wood as Kakashi was nailing a board on top of a tall building while upside down. Sakura was smoothing some of the lumber with her kunai and some sandpaper as both boys dropped what they were carrying next to Sakura. Somehow, Naruto got a new set of clothes a few days ago. The blonde said in reason that most of his outfits were already ruined, so he tried to go for a simple long-sleeve shirt. Sakura still couldn't believe the amount of orange plastered on the blonde from neck to torso. At least the sleeves were black. She noticed too that her teammate still had that weird spiral accessory on his shoulders. She couldn't help but shrug. She noticed that the neck area of the suit was a versus neck rather than a round neck, effectively making the mesh undershirt visible. Naruto's headband was damaged, so he had to get a new one, now comfortably placed on his neck. All orange aside, Sakura couldn't help but notice that Naruto looked good in it. But it wasn't her concern now, she had other things in mind. What I wouldn't give for a mission outside the village, Sakura muttered while Naruto sighed. Yeah, we need a break. Naruto added glumly as he sat down by the nodded to both of their wishes. Naruto-kun. A shy voice had interrupted their train of thoughts when the blonde turned around and saw Hinata. Naruto had a questioning look on his face as Hinata spoke. "See, can we talk?" The blonde raised an eyebrow at this before looking up at Kakashi, who only gave him a thumbs up. Naruto then looked at his teammates. Sasuke bolted to get more wood while Sakura gave shooing gesture to Naruto telling him to go along with the girl. Still unsure, Naruto left rather reluctantly but seemed to go along with it when he turned to Hinata. "So, what do you want to talk about, Hinata?" The Hyuga heiress merely answered him with a stutter, "And not here. Too many people might listen to what we're going to talk about." Moving to a secluded alley, Hinata led her crush there and then she turned to him. Naruto-kun, I just wanted you to know that despite of everything I've learned, I still want to be friends with you. Hinata looked serious at this, a blush on her face as she pushed her fingers together. Maybe even more. Hinata had to at least let Naruto know that she was there for him. From all of the bad things happening to him and the stuff thrown in his way, she wanted to let Naruto know that she wasn't going to stop getting close to him. "Hinata, what are you? Shikamaru-san told you, didn't he? That we knew your secret and that I'm not afraid of you. In fact I find you more admirable after all everything that has happened to you." She said the last sentence with a blush as she looked away, trying so hard not to faint in front of him. She knew now that Naruto needed people to support him, to lift him up even after falling down many times. A smile, a small one escaped his lips, turning larger and his eyes seemed to have a hint of shine in them. Naruto was happy for what Hinata had said, something that made Hinata speechless for a second and her thoughts drifted. It was not to be however when Naruto spoke. And the way he started speaking to her, told volumes of his appreciation. "Thank you, Hinata. Your words made me feel happy. I feel so happy right now that someone like you would do that for me. You don't know how much it really does mean to me. I mean, I'm so happy right now a sliver of a tear escaped his eyes for a moment. What was that, exactly? He asked and Hinata couldn't help but feel captured by that moment. Why am I crying all of a sudden? Naruto asked and another teardrop escapes his eyes. All this time, I've been scared. Scared that people would walk away when they find out that I'm the container to the monster that killed countless people yet. More tears kept appearing cascading his cheeks as he rubbed them with his arm. You and Shikamaru keep telling me that it wouldn't change what you thought about me. Hinata found something in herself that made her feel more confident all of a sudden and spoke to Naruto without even a stutter. Because you are important to me, Naruto-kun, that's why. Without you, I wouldn't have the inspiration to change and get better. Naruto then looked at Hinata straight at the face. She had stated it before to him and she felt repeating what she just said to him before his fight with Neji. She was smiling. A blush kept appearing on her cheeks but she seemed to dazzle out more. Naruto had never realized before that Hinata smiling like what she was doing now, it made her seem pretty in his eyes. It dazzled him. People may not see you for who you are, but I do. I see you as Naruto-kun. She said. Sure, Naruto had flaws, Hinata knew that everyone has them but she accepted that in him. Whatever faults she sees in him, to her it didn't matter. To her, Naruto was a wonderful person and now having full knowledge of his past, despite his right to hate his village, he had set out to prove them wrong, to let them see him as he was. Hinata held Naruto with both her hands on his cheeks and then in a manner outside of Hinata's own character, she embraced him. All form of embarrassment leaving her behind as she did so. Naruto was surprised by the sudden gesture as Hinata did so. Naruto-kun, a person like you deserves more. This person who is hugging you now, she believes in you. Naruto's astonishment slowly vanished and he grinned even though Hinata couldn't see. She could feel Naruto smiling behind her. He gently pushed her away and his smile infected her to do the same. Hinata, you're the best. To Hinata, this was another small victory for her. When Naruto came back from his talk with Hinata, he didn't notice the spring he had on his footsteps. Sasuke had noticed that he was picking a lot more lumber than usual, effectively cutting the time it needed for them to finish. The repairs were done much earlier than anyone had really thought and making their teacher dismiss them early. Sakura then turned to Sasuke who was already walking away. Say, Sasuke-kun. As if Sasuke had already figured what Sakura was going to say, he shot it down faster than a rabbit scurrying to its hole. No. But, another answer from Sasuke was heard. No. Sakura sighed as her shoulders slumped. She then noticed that Naruto had suddenly left their team as he went back to his apartment. Sakura had raised an eyebrow at this. Usually, this is the moment where he asks me on a date, but she eyed the blonde curiously. Since when did Naruto started to lose interest in her? It wouldn't have anything to do with Hinata, would it? Either way, Sakura was somewhat glad for her teammate. At least now she wouldn't have to keep rejecting his offer. He was slowly getting over her. Perhaps it was for the best. When Naruto had arrived home, he opened the door to find Jiraiya sitting on his chair and reading the labels on one of his cup ramen noodles. "You're really crazy for this stuff, aren't you?" the old man asks with a smirk on his face. Naruto merely grabbed the ramen pack from Jiraiya's pack and placed it on his counter. "What are you doing here, Ero-sennin?" he asked. The old man merely kept his grin as he began examining the little house around him. "Good question. What am I, the master, I'm doing in my apprentice's home?" "Yeah, he's a guy all right. No decorations on the wall, and the floor is a complete mess. Too bad I never saw any magazines in here. It would have been nice to egg him on from there. But in all honesty, kid, I came here because I want to look for someone. And the people high up want someone to accompany me. I agreed on one condition, that I take you with me." Naruto had raised an eyebrow at this. "Why me?" Jiraiya rolled his eyes. "You're my apprentice, you dimwit. What else is my reason?" Naruto put up a hand beneath his chin and stared up at the old man with scrutinizing eyes. "I don't know, this sounds too suspicious if you ask me." Naruto replied while Jiraiya smirked. "Don't you want to meet that person? I hear she's a hot babe." Jiraiya elbowed Naruto with that smile of his while the young boy's face turned to a scowl. "I knew it. Listen here, Ero-sennin, I've got better things to do, like training and doing some repairs left by that stupid invasion, than to go around the country to search for some hot woman just so you could perv on her." Jiraiya sighed at this as his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Fine, I was going to teach you a new jutsu too." The old man stood up from Naruto's chair and began to walk at the door. "I guess I'm just going to have to ask Sasuke for this one." A fire erupted in Naruto's eyes as Jiraiya was about to leave. Naruto immediately pushed door and stared up at the old man. "Let's talk business here." 2 hours later, Naruto had a grin on his face as he was walking beside his new master. The old man was looking awfully thoughtful on his notes as the blonde kept walking out front. Behind him, the gates of Konoha were looking awfully small now. He was pretty sure they were far away. "Ah, I almost forgot. The counselors didn't want me to give this to you so soon without the Hokage's approval. But time was short and we need all the help we could get from our ninja." So, Jiraiya then rummaged through his backpack, pulled out a scroll and finally unsealed an object inside it. A poof of smoke erupted from the scroll and out came a green Chunin vest. Naruto's eyes were sparkling with wonder as he was looking at it. "The judges deemed that you were worthy enough of the title of Chunin. So congratulations, you earned it." Naruto held the vest before him with both hands and then proceeded to wear it. When he closed the vest at their locks, Jiraiya had thought that he was looking at Minato when Naruto wore the vest properly. "How do I look, Ero-sennin?" "Like a million Ryo, kid. If my eyes were deceiving me, I'd say you were the Yondaime Hokage." And he wasn't lying when he saw the blonde in that green vest. Minus the whisker marks and then add a little more hair on the side of his face and Naruto could pass off as Yondaime's younger self. He was surprised people wouldn't notice the resemblance. Naruto meanwhile, grinned proudly at himself from his current master's words. "So what's my new jutsu going to be like, Ero-sennin?" Jiraiya turned his attention back to his notes as he said, "We'll get to that after I've gathered enough information in the nearest town with a bustling gambling business. The lady we're searching for happens to be a casino freak, although she's horrible at making bets and loves sake more than any other person I know." "Huh, why are we searching for someone like her?" Naruto asked, baffled at the notion of looking for some deadbeat. "Hey now, she may be a money-spending alcoholic, but believe it or not, she's my teammate once under the Sandaime Hokage. She's pretty strong too. That swinging arm of hers can flip castles like they were okonomiyaki. She's a damn good medic to boot." Monstrous and frightening strength aside, Naruto couldn't help but admire the person in Jiraiya's description for her power. Jiraiya then continued, problem is, she has a jutsu that can alter her age from her teen years to her late 20s to early 30s to escape her debt collectors. She's also vain, short-tempered and more violent than a prison's torture chamber. She's your teammate, right? I guess she's pretty old then. Jiraiya flinched at his apprentice's conclusion and reprimanded his student by giving him one piece of advice. Don't let her hear that or you're as good as fish paste. The Toad Sage's nerves began to rack as he described his teammate. Tsunade had been known to him as having the sort of love taps that would punch holes through you. Especially to him, particularly to him, as he almost died from Tsunade's punch when she saw him peeping at her once back when they were younger. They had to reset his jaw and his team had to be on leave for 2 months. You know, Ero Sennin, the way you're describing her makes me think that you're not too sure about meeting her yourself. Naruto pointed out in an oblivious manner. Jiraiya, on the other hand, shivered from the thought alone. Nah, what are you talking about, kid? I'm her teammate, she'll be glad to see me. Jiraiya stated proudly as he puffed his chest out and thumped it with his right hand. I hope. So how are we going to look for her aside from the casinos? Naruto asked. Jiraiya looked up and then back to Naruto as he replied. Well, usually, she's renowned as the legendary sucker. We should start with that at least. Naruto raised an eyebrow at this. Why legendary sucker? By now Jiraiya was giving off one of those grins as he scribbled on his notepad, giggling like a little school girl before he gave an answer to his current student. It depends on who you ask. Naruto's curious look turned into a frown as he pointed out to the Toad Sage, you're not above any kind of perversion, are you? I'm not a super pervert for nothing, Naruto. He said that as if he was proud of it. Naruto simply sighed and shook his head. Let's just get this over with so that I can learn that new jutsu you promised me. So impatient, yet so eager to learn. A hybrid of Kushina and Minato, Jiraiya noted that Naruto displayed Kushina's impatience and Minato's eagerness to learn any jutsu. Sheesh, kid, learn to live a little. Jiraiya then turned back to his notes as he said to the blonde. You'll get your chance when I buy some balls and balloons at a nearby store. Trust me, you'll need that. Naruto then had a thought running in his head when he remembered something. That's right, I forgot to ask, what happened to the 3 Suna ninja that were captured? Jiraiya's good mood turned sour as he replied. Konoha is bidding them as bargaining chips to Suna as a result of the invasion, especially the Jinchuriki of the Aikibi. I saw his seal a few days back and I have to say, it was too awful. I had to make some precautionary measures just in case to stop any more suggestions that might ruin the boy's mental health further. Suna can mass-produce fuinjutsu users, they can't create a master of the craft, but that was just god-awful. I've never seen a seal so primitive and so inefficient for sealing a biju that I couldn't help but turn sour at such an abrasive and flippant way to deal with creatures of mass destruction. Naruto then answered with his eyes with somewhat no focus in them as he stared straight down the winding path before them, as that's so. I want to talk to him when I get back. Jiraiya had raised an eyebrow at this. Exactly, why are you asking anyway? Naruto never answered Jiraiya that day, only that he could tell that Naruto had a fist clenched as they continued to walk. Jiraiya could tell that his student wanted to confirm something. 3 days later, outside the walls of Konoha, 2 figures stood just before the village itself. Straw hats covered their heads and their clothing of a long coat with red clouds and high collars obscured their faces. One of them stood taller than the one to his right. His only defining feature was his height compared to his companion. He towered over his partner by a few good inches, and on his back was a large and heavily bandaged weapon, a sword from the likes of it. Both walked in a leisurely pace as they closed in on the village. Konoha has suffered through an invasion, its ninja weakened and its leader dead. The stench of war still has yet to disappear. Don't you find this quite a sorrowful turn of events, Itachi? The taller of the two asked. 2 pairs of fully matured Sharingan eyes looked at his partner, then back to the village gates. No, I hold no attachments nor affection for this village. Came Itachi's quick reply before he added, it is unwise for you to think of me that way, Kisame. The larger man, now known as Kisame, simply chuckled at the thought. So heartless, Itachi, whether you have abandoned your village or not, this is the place where you were born and raised, is it not? Itachi merely flicked a little of his fingers out of his sleeve as they approached the gate closer and closer. 2 guards were already fast asleep. I have gained what I can from this village. I would not dare to come back here if it wasn't for our objective. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki, A chuckle had escaped Kisami's lips as he sneered and looked back at Itachi. Don't you wish to take a detour first? Maybe a nice stroll to your old home would be preferable. Itachi was silent for a few seconds before replying, there is no need. The Yondaime Hokage's legacy is our target. We shouldn't stray from our objective for too long. After all, Itachi looked around and saw various ninja at work or at least taking a break in one of their shops. Even though we're S-ranked criminals, we can't have a whole village breathing down on our necks during our stay. Chapter 6. Full Bloom. Itachi had never thought to one day set foot in this village again after the massacre. There was a certain difference in it once he saw it in a different light. For someone of his reputation, he had expected that his views had changed. What that change was, he was never sure. But the only thing keeping him from casting this village away was nowhere in sight. Good. He had a pretty good idea that their target was not in the village any longer based on what he could hear from the villagers. Sticking around was not possible, but he had to know where their target was. Kisame was itching for battle and his partner could tell that he would cause widespread death the moment he got wind of their target actually giving them the slip. But he had a mission to carry out, and that mission was to capture the Kyuubi. But in a sense that he made contact first and keep him away from the hands of Akatsuki as subtle as he possibly can. But if that failed, he would have no choice but to kill him. After all, what's one more sacrifice to maintain peace? Both of them sat inside a nearby snack shop eating contentedly with some dango and a fresh serving of oolong tea. To Itachi, this was the most peace he'd had in his entire career as a shinobi. Have you recently heard? Jiraiya-sama of the Sannin just disappeared one day from the village, just when the council was considering him to be one of the candidates to be Hokage. Itachi immediately focused his attention on two nearby diners. Are you serious? Then who's going to be eligible for the position? Hitaki Kakashi's suitable enough. But he still has a long way to go. People have been clamoring that he's the second coming of the Sandaime Hokage and I tend to agree, but I don't know, he still has a lot to cover. I wouldn't be too sure about that. From what I've been hearing from the grapevine, Kakashi already has a genin team to learn from. Not to mention he was a former captain of an Anbu squad. I hear that they're considering two of his students for Chunin rank. Not a bad resume if you ask me. What? You mean the last of the Uchiha? If his fight wasn't interrupted, maybe. I'm not an expert when it comes to judging matches, but I think Kakashi's other student is more eligible for the rank. Itachi had raised an eyebrow at this. Oh, that brat, huh? Yeah, maybe. The Chunin had been clamoring that he's the dark horse of the whole tournament. Maybe I should have bet on the Kyuubi brat. Shish. Not so loud. And I thought we were already past that after what happened. Sorry. Old habits die hard. Naruto came a long way to get where he is now, huh? What I don't understand is how he's been missing for 2 days too. I'm guessing that Jiraiya-sama has taken him. I see them talking down the road from time to time. It's really puzzling. Well, if you live in a world with fire-breathing ninjas and gigantic summons, I wouldn't at least call that weird. The two men laughed as they got up and paid their bill before leaving the shop. My, quite a discovery, wouldn't you say so, Itachi-san? Kisame whispered as both of them finished their tea. An inconvenience that we had never even thought about. It is as if Konoha is onto us. Quickly finishing his tea, Kisame already knew what would come next. Let us go, Kisame. We have no further business here. When they got out, a voice had suddenly interrupted Itachi's train of thought. It is surprising for you to visit after everything that you've done. The voice paused until the smaller of the two looked back at him with those Sharingan eyes of his. Itachi observed Hitaki Kakashi looking at him with his hands in his pockets. Itachi then noted the two people that Kakashi had behind him. One was Sarutobi Asuma and the other was Yuhi Kurenai, a formidable Chunin from Kakashi's class. Uchiha Itachi. The two behind Kakashi looked surprised as Itachi looked at them with a frown. Let's take this somewhere more private, Itachi suggested. And with that, the five of them vanished in a plume of smoke. Naruto and Jiraiya. Naruto was looking irate when he had the water balloon in his hands while Jiraiya was supervising his training or when he had run out of information to collect in one place. Jiraiya had done some advising, but the gray-haired ninja had insisted that he figure out the technique on his own. He had decided that Jiraiya was much harsher than Iruka then and there. Iruka would spoon-feed him if Naruto wanted it, but Jiraiya would not dare hold his hand metaphorically. To Naruto, Jiraiya carried a lot of expectations to someone he was training. His method of learning was harsh and indifferent, almost uncaring even. That is, if one were to take it as it is. Kakashi had told him to look underneath the underneath. Looking beyond the deception was key. Naruto knew he had to be observant of what Jiraiya did moments earlier when he popped the balloon. He had been rotating the chakra as Jiraiya would have wanted him to, and Naruto had followed his advice, yet for the life of him, he couldn't exactly figure out how he did it and what made the ball so lumpy to begin with. Whenever he was looking at Jiraiya, the old man would notice and grin while pointing an index finger to the side of head, gesturing for Naruto to think. That actually frustrated the blonde. He wasn't exactly the sharpest kunai in the set. Jiraiya had already pointed that out, but from what Jiraiya was gesturing at, it was as if he had complete faith in Naruto's intellect. Growling, he turned his attention back on to the water balloon and shook it furiously in frustration. The delicate balance of the skin actually destabilized the natural state of the object as the water inside shook violently, popping it and surprising the ever-living crap out of Naruto. What the fuck? Indeed. The things were delicate all right. Being a prankster, he noted that the quality of the balloons weren't up to his standards. But that didn't bother him so much as he had realized what happened. Suddenly, an idea appeared in his head. Jiraiya had gone off somewhere again to gather more information. Naruto inhaled this time, remembering what Jiraiya had taught him before going for another water balloon and looking determined at it. This time, he would do it right. Konoha. Maida guy was as weird as they come. He had a peculiar way of dealing with life's problems and had an even stranger way in coping with them. He was loud and oftentimes spoke without thinking ahead. He was a firm believer and serious advocate of the power of youth and spoke as if it was his religion all the way. Bizarre by anyone else's standards, to many that actually knew Guy, he was a rather observant fellow. He could tell how a person behaves through simple body language alone. Probably a result of his harsh training in taijutsu, thus excluding a medic, he had the most knowledge considering how the body works. That is how good Guy was compared to many other Chunin in the village. Guy had a strange view to look at the world, but that view was something that had sustained him throughout most of his shinobi career. In a nutshell, Guy may be a weird nut, but he was as good as they get. He'd practically been dubbed the best taijutsu specialist that Konoha had to offer. That was how good he was, and it was foolish to write him out of any danger that he posed, especially when he started to get serious and actually start thinking. When he saw Kakashi following two people in black cloaks with red cloud designs all over them, just as he was meeting with his team, he had to cancel it immediately and told his genin to go towards the city. He followed his rival as they reached a portion of the bank of the Nakano River. He stopped when the five people did. From what he could tell from where he was standing, he could see Kurenai and Asuma flanking Kakashi's back while the two relatively unknown shinobi were at their front. At first, Guy thought about performing an ambush but decided against it. He did not survive this long just to storm his way through so recklessly. So, like any shinobi, he would at first watch. It was then that the shorter of the suspicious duo decided to remove the hat that finally surprised Guy. It was one of their top priority missing nin, Uchiha Itachi. Suddenly, he felt his spine tingling from just how much danger Itachi seemed to give off. This wasn't good. Kakashi. When he had locked in on the duo, he knew he was probably in for a fight. Jiraiya had told him about an organization made up of the most dangerous criminals in the current world. One of them happened to cause a massacre of one of the founding clans of Konoha. Standing before him with not even a hint of worry etched on his face, Uchiha Itachi unbuttoned the neck area of his cloak and let a hand dangle to where the current opening of the robe was, which was in front of his chest. I have no intention of fighting with you. I have no qualms in this village. I merely wish to collect our objective in Konoha. Sasuke isn't here. Kakashi had cut him off. He had sent the younger of the two brothers on his request mission to obtain one of his clan's summoning scrolls. Itachi did not even flinch seemingly when he heard the name of his younger brother. The elder of the two merely replied, a logical guess but a wrong one. We are after something else, the fourth Hokage's legacy to be exact. Kakashi pushed his forehead protector up, revealing his Sharingan as he continued, Naruto then. By that statement, that means you must work for Akatsuki. Now that got Itachi and his partner's attention, judging from what Kakashi had deduced. Nobody was supposed to know in Fire Country who or what Akatsuki is. At least, that's what entered Kakashi's head. Itachi-san, I guess we can't leave them as they are, can we? The taller partner of Itachi removed his straw hat and hoisted the gigantic sword over his shoulder. We can't have Konoha learning of our existence. The blue-skinned man said with a menacing grin. Kurenai was scowling. You're the monster of Kurigakure, Hoshigaki Kisame, wanted on accounts of genocide and multiple atrocities in Kurigakure no Sato. It seems Itachi has some powerful allies as well. Kisame chuckled and bowed as if he was proud of his work. I'm honored to have my name spread out even to Konoha. Kakashi, what the heck is going on here? Asuma asked as he drew forth his trench knives and held them in a reverse grip. A question that should be mostly left unanswered today. The Uchiha then spoke to Kisame. We are taking Kakashi-san with us, Kisame. An unfortunate decision then. It looks like Samahata won't be able to go all out. If he were disappointed, he certainly wasn't showing it. In fact, he was grinning beneath that huge collar of his. The former Anbu member turned missing nin then turned to Kakashi and pointed his finger at the man. Eliminate the rest. And just like that, all hell broke loose. Naruto. When Jiraiya had walked in on Naruto's training, the Toad Sage had never expected the blonde to pop the water balloon so quickly with one hand. A grin escaped his apprentice's lips and he whooped in joy, all the while smirking at Jiraiya, who looked surprised at the sudden turn of events. Holy hell in a hand basket. Since when? So what's next? Any more questions in his head were immediately purged when he went back inside the inn while he told Naruto to wait. A few minutes later, Jiraiya was back hauling a sack of rubber balls with him. Naruto looked on in displeasure. It was another damn exercise. Alright, step 2. Make this rubber ball explode by adding more power. Jiraiya demonstrated with one hand as the ball burst in his hand. Naruto's look of disappointment was replaced with intrigue as he stared at the older man's hand. So I'm going to flood that thing with more chakra until it explodes. It doesn't seem that difficult compared to the first one, if you ask me. Naruto commented before grabbing a rubber ball from the sack while Jiraiya chuckled. Oh, you have no idea. What? The blonde asked. Jiraiya merely gave a small lie and said, nothing, just something that I recalled when I was in town fishing for information. Again, Jiraiya wanted Naruto to solve things on his own for this one. If Naruto did have that potential to surpass the fourth Hokage, then this would be the jutsu to actually prove it. So far, his expectations had been met with Naruto's ingenuity. When he saw Naruto began performing the second part of the training with little to no effect, he raised an eyebrow. Naruto, instead of looking impatient, took a deep breath and stared at the rubber ball once more. There's got to be something I'm doing wrong. He heard the blonde mumble and Jiraiya grinned. It looks like his student didn't need that many hints after all. Konoha. As soon as Itachi finished those words, he had suddenly turned into a flock of crows that scattered all about. Kakashi looked around, his Sharingan casting off the genjutsu as Kurenai and Asuma dispelled theirs. He was not prepared when Itachi had suddenly appeared behind him with a kunai pose to strike Asuma down. Shit. Kakashi immediately spun and just as quickly lightning crackled with his hand. He was about to complete the Reikiri when he suddenly stopped as his Sharingan dispelled another genjutsu. How on earth is he doing this? This is a double-layered genjutsu. Kakashi cancelled his attack as he caught Itachi by the torso. The vision that was Itachi turned out to be Kurenai while Asuma turned out to be the Uchiha prodigy. What on earth? Kurenai asked in bewilderment as Kakashi lunged forward and headed straight to the river. It's a trap, Kakashi muttered when Itachi suddenly glowed and exploded with a single hand seal. Boom. The earth beneath the clone shattered from the impact on the ground, sending smoldering boulders and debris flying everywhere with some crashing into the waters of the river below. Kakashi and Kurenai landed on the water as Itachi jumped on the surface of Nakano River as well. He looked at his two opponents while his partner was fighting Asuma. That was dangerous. Itachi had suddenly laid a trap and used those two genjutsu to distract us and break our formation. Asuma was pushed back by Kisame and Itachi placed a cage bunshin there while we were under the illusion and subsequently fooled us both. Did you honestly think that my eyes are the only ways that I can cast genjutsu? Itachi asked as he walked towards the both of them. Kakashi and Kurenai readied themselves, but Itachi remained impassive. I knew of that obvious weakness years ago, even before I became a missing nin. So to compensate, I developed my genjutsu ability and trained with it, so with even a tip of my finger, I can place you into an illusion easily, and from there, cast more as needed. Kakashi and Kurenai flinched at that indication. From what they could tell from Itachi's words, it meant that he would be able to cast a genjutsu onto even the most prepared shinobi and then layer them as much as he needed or wanted. It became quite clear then and there, Uchiha Itachi was now standing at the level of a cage. A hand had suddenly popped from Itachi's right sleeve, and with them several shuriken were there. Kurenai was about to draw her weapon when Kakashi began performing a set of hand seals before slamming his hands on the water beneath him. Sweden. Sujinheki, water release. Water wall encampment formation. The water soon rose up and protected them when 4 deadly water drills slammed into the new obstacle. Impressive, Kakashi-san. That Sharingan of yours must have come from a very talented member of the Uchiha clan. It is unfortunate that you can never access its true power since you are not of Uchiha descent. He's not even trying, Kakashi thought. Behind him, Kurenai had disappeared and the water fell down once more to the river. Behind Itachi, Kurenai had resurfaced and let loose a pair of kunai towards Itachi's back. Hearing the splash of the water, Itachi turned his sights to where he heard it from and saw 2 kunai heading straight at him. Leaning back slightly, the 2 weapons went past him with no trouble at all as Kakashi now performed his signature technique, the Reikiri lightning blade. He then heard a whistle and looked back. He saw Kurenai swirling and vanishing from his sight. Megan. Jubakusatsu, demonic illusion. Tree binding death. Itachi's Sharingan eyes spun madly as they deciphered the genjutsu in mere seconds. Kakashi suddenly froze up when he felt himself bound and restrained. The gray-haired Chunin looked surprised when he saw a tree binding him close. His Sharingan instantly dispelled the technique with not much fuss. When he dispelled the illusion, he was met with Itachi's foot hitting his face. Itachi then let go of the shuriken that he had in his hand and sent them straight Kurenai, who dodged by jumping to the side but not before being met with an Itachi who had raised her by the collar and kicked her abdomen, sending her flying. A futile effort, Kakashi-san, Kurenai-san, with these eyes, I am nigh invincible. My Sharingan has evolved into a much higher form compared to yours. Up on the riverside, Asuma was having as much trouble as with Kisame as Kakashi and Kurenai were with Itachi on the river below. Not only did Kisame have a longer reach, but he also had that monstrous strength of his, increasing the potency and killing potential of his blade, Samahata. He had an unfortunate lesson in learning of Samahata's properties when Kisame had grazed his shoulder. The most terrifying thing was, Kisame looked like he was merely playing with him. Fortunately for him, he managed to nick Kisame on the cheek earlier, making him sure that he could take on a former member of the 7 Shinobi swordsmen. Sweden. Sukoden no Jutsu, water release. Water shark bullet technique. A surge of water shaped like a white shark headed towards Asuma, who had jumped from his spot and rolled on the ground. Upon climbing to his feet, Asuma was suddenly surprised when Kisame was beside him with his humongous blade already in mid-swing. Konoha Goriki Senpu, leaf strong whirlwind. A strong back kick smashed into Kisame's chest, and sent him careening towards the river. Kisame bounced on the water surface 3 more times like a small pebble before landing on the far side of the river as the water rose up. The concrete wall on the other side caved in from the force of Kisame's velocity. Guy, you sure took your sweet time getting here. Asuma said to his comrade at his front, who answered, I've had to make arrangements, forgive me for running this late. When the water receded, they saw Kisame with his left hand on the now cratered wall and looked as if he was perfectly fine from Guy's attack. The worst part of it all was that Kisame looked completely fine and was looking as if he was enjoying the fight way too much. Konoha shinobi aren't incompetent after all. Now I'm getting excited. I would surrender if I were you. Right now, there are reinforcements preparing and advancing to this area as we speak. Any minute now, the village will be in complete lockdown. No one can enter or get out of this village until the threat is eliminated. Bluffing already. Something underhanded as that doesn't suit a dodo bird like you. Kisame replied with a sneer. His razor-sharp teeth showed as his grin widened from the man's posture. A story he recalled from his former master, the previous older of Samahata, Fuguki Suikazan. There was once a mere genin from Konoha who could only fight battles with taijutsu only. He was a man bold enough to face the previous generation of the Seven Swordsmen. Of course, the brave man died from that encounter. He was put to the swords of the vicious swordsmen of the mist that day, but not before killing more than half of their members. His master lived to tell the tale, but the wielders of Kubikirihocho, Executioner's Blade, Kiba, Fangs, Haramakare, and Shibuki, Splash, were killed by the man's vicious attack. The tale was passed on to the many people all around Kiri, and many of them couldn't help but respect the man for what he had done and accomplished that day, even if it had cost them shinobi with illustrious positions. The Seven Swordsmen were forever changed that day. The criterion just turned harsher after that, with his master recalling that many prospective members were killed during the selection process that were conducted by the three of them, Akebi no Jinin, Kuriarere Kushimaru, and his former master, Fuguki Suikazan. And now, seeing for himself, Kisame couldn't help but feel excited about the prospect of fighting this fearsome style. The Junin before him struck an uncanny resemblance to the one his master had described. Ah, he must be the man's son then. Kisame thought with a grin as he placed Samahata on his back once more and grinned wickedly as he began performing handseal after handseal. To think that I could face someone using that style here in Konoha. It just makes my blood boil. Kisame was about to perform another jutsu when Itachi appeared, beside him with an arm holding the taller of the two back. As necessary as this was, we cannot have an entire village be after us due to a small leak. We are not here to start a war. A tactical retreat is the most prudent solution that we have right now. Kakashi was about to charge up with another Reikiri until Itachi spoke once more. It is useless for you to fight me, Kakashi-san. You should know, after all, I have not just the power of the Sharingan, but also its higher, more evolved form, the Mangekyo Sharingan, Kaleidoscope Pinwheel Eye. So save your chakra, you can never hope to take me down with such a jutsu. Kisame clicked his tongue as he placed Samahata on his back, just when things were about to get fun. With this new set of information, it is safe to say that they placed the Jinchuriki somewhere out of reach, possibly with a high-ranking shinobi making up his guard. The leader should be notified. Itachi mentioned this and both vanished in a cloud of smoke. Kakashi lowered his guard down for a second as the four Junin remained silent while they all stared at each other rather solemnly. Kakashi, you seem to know about the freak show that Itachi is hanging with right now. Why are they after Naruto? Kakashi simply nodded and noticed that his left FL ankle ached severely after what happened. Hospital first. This story is going to last a while. Jiraiya-sama filled me in a little earlier. Unknown location. To Uchiha Sasuke, the remnants of one of his clan's hideouts reminded him of memories he would rather not recall. The tall, hollow and almost dull walls of this particular hideout reminded him of his father once taking him and Itachi through these very halls. Just the mere thought of it made Sasuke shake with fury and he almost punched a hole through the wall on his right. Inwardly, he vowed to never think of such things with familiarity. Itachi had done a grave sin to him, to the clan and to his ancestors. A transgression that can only be rewarded with death. Sasuke swore he would make Itachi pay. Sasuke-chan, I never thought I'd see you visit your family's warehouses so soon. His dark thoughts were interrupted by the voice that he had recognized. Sasuke looked at the old woman sitting on top of a concrete block and comforted with a pillow beneath her. All around her, cats were either standing up or resting on her lap. She was the keeper of their warehouses, the one he would go to if he were to need something really important. Neko ba, I'm here for a summoning scroll, he said, without as much as an opening. He wouldn't waste time for small talk. That wasn't what he had in mind when he visited this particular warehouse. His statement raised an eyebrow from the old woman who was wondering why Sasuke would want a summoning scroll this early in his career. Then again, for being left deprived of family at an early age and having his brother being responsible for the mess, she could not blame the boy. Do you have an animal in mind then? She asked. Sasuke answered, something that can do massive area damage in a matter of seconds, something agile, fast enough and can maneuver well against other summoned animals. I'm asking for something like the toad summons, I guess. Neko ba thought about this for several long seconds until she clapped her hands at the idea. I may have something that can maneuver well against other summons. I don't know about your first and third choices though, but it can give you an advantage that very few have in the shinobi world. The old woman then called for her granddaughter, Tamaki, to enter the room. She told her to obtain a scroll from one of the shelves filed under a specific corridor and then turned her attention back to Sasuke. Tamaki came back with a few scrolls in hand and a bigger scroll underneath them. The Hawk summons will serve you well. It suits you, Sasuke-chan. The youngest Uchiha took the scrolls from Tamaki's hands and nodded in appreciation towards his clan's keeper for many years. Wordlessly, he turned his back from the two and left with a solemn promise of returning when the time came. Outside the hideout, his escort was waiting for him. It was an Anbu member wearing the standard uniform and with only a distinguishing mask that was in the form of a tiger. Sasuke noted that the man moved almost mechanically in their journey to this place. His voice was muffled by the mask, but Sasuke could tell that it was flat and in monotone. His movements were ingrained with years of training and noted that Itachi had acted pretty much the same after he became a member in a short while. His interest in the organization peaked right then and there. Maybe he could apply for a membership one of these days and train under their command. He was sure as hell that he could get stronger under such harsh training conditions. Have you found what you have been searching for? The masked operative asked, Sasuke responding with a quiet nod. A messenger bird flew over them and circled before heading back in the general direction of the village. Perfect timing too, we are being recalled to the village immediately. An emergency has come up. With that, the Anbu member leapt from his position and made way towards the village, with Sasuke following suit. Konoha. Haruno Sakura was quite disappointed to find out that her teammates had left the village. Sasuke had requested an expedition to one of his clan's warehouses and had been missing since this morning while Naruto disappeared 2 days earlier on a mission without telling them first. At least, that's what Kakashi had told her when he suddenly dismissed her and told her to meet some of her fellow genin at a certain place for another cleanup mission. She found it odd, however. Because the village was in total disarray and Konoha didn't have an elected leader as of now, there was no way would they be allowed to take missions outside of the village while they were still on somewhat a lockdown. That meant no missions from third parties entirely. The missions requested by the office to the outside world itself were even more unlikely. Those things required that the shinobi who was to take that mission should be of Chunin skill level. They were often dangerous and involved national or village security, and since Naruto was unlikely to have that kind of mission, it brought more questions into her head. She now understood why Shikamaru was distrustful to many of the adults around the village as of late. She found the idea unnerving to say the least. I'm glad that you finally arrived to join us, Sakura. What have you been doing for the last 10 minutes? Making sure your hair was silky smooth. A voice asked, mockingly. Sakura's train of thought was suddenly disrupted when she looked vexed at that jab at her. Turning to her right, she saw Kiba sitting down on a stoop while petting Akamaru, who was grinning at her. She turned her head up and saw her upperclassman, Tenten, sitting on the roof twirling a kunai with her index finger and Shikamaru leaning on the wall not too far from Kiba. I'm surprised that you could do sarcasm, Kiba. I always thought it would be too much for someone like you. She replied to Kiba's remark, causing the feral boy to growl while Tenten giggled on the roof as she said to Kiba, Touché, Kiba. Before Kiba could make a witty comeback, Shikamaru took this chance to stop the bickering and not waste any more of his time. Alright, that's enough. We're not here for stupid banter. As you know, the Chunin force is maintaining some order in and around the village while the Chunin are patrolling the borders. The genin teams were assigned to help with the restoration of some of the infrastructure if you can't tell since the past week. The Chunin decided for some of the genin to take the kids to one of the intelligence division's departments to help out. And thankfully, we didn't get the torture and interrogation department, or else we'd get to see Anko and possibly Ibiki. With that, all of the teenagers shuddered at the thought. So where are we getting assigned to? Shikamaru looked at the scroll he had been given and read the contents further. It says here we're in the research and development department. They weren't hit pretty badly, but they have a lot of stuff worth getting rid of. Some of the equipment there seemed too damaged to be reused. Wait, the R&D department. The place where they do research on weapons and seal applications. Oh hell, sign me up. Tenten interrupted as her eyes sparkled with glee. For Tenten, it was as if she was in Candy Land. Kiba took a step back at the girl's sudden change of attitude while Sakura looked at Shikamaru and asked a suddenly important question. You know, based from what I'm seeing with Tenten-san, I think we should go for T&I, don't you think? Sakura murmured to Shikamaru, who shrugged at that. I'd rather die than be scarred for life. Shikamaru answered. To this, Hiba shuddered involuntarily by just the mere thought of it. He had never met Ibiki or Anko outside the Chunin exam, but he had hoped that he wouldn't have to meet them outside of that. They seemed to be the kind of people with weird interests. And he had put it mildly, of course. Considering that both of them were complete whack jobs, it was hard to ascertain what they were capable of doing if they felt like it. When they finally made their way towards the Research and Development Department, affectionately called the R&D, Tenten looked like she was shaking in her sandals, not from pure anxiety, but in sheer excitement. Hey, Shikamaru. I think this would be a good time to hustle up and get things over with. Miss Stab You Silly is going to explode like a Fuda. Hiba pointed out their senior as Shikamaru typically sighed and went inside. When Sakura saw the building outside, it was plain and looked like any other building out there in the village. It didn't even look like it was the R&D department. She thought it might have to do with how many of their military installations had to be kept secret and hidden perfectly enough that no one would suspect. And what better way to do it than to disguise it as a commercial building complex in the middle of a populated village? But when they went down below, things got a bit more interesting. By that she meant that it really was interesting, but with all the junk scattered around along with being piled left and right, she was sure that any person stupid enough not to be careful here could have their legs cut off from some random machine or weapon. The place was littered with scrolls, and they weren't used for storage. When she picked up one of them, she noted that they were either statistical data or journal logs. All of it seemed to be written like some chicken was scratching on the paper, calculations that she knew were far too complicated, formulas that were drawn up and taught in higher places of learning, chemical combinations, chakra experiments, fuinjutsu research, schematic diagrams, all of it. Geez, the amount of crap in here is worse than the crap I have in my room. Hiba muttered. He jumped when he had accidentally kicked a short sword and almost impaled Shikamaru through doing so. Hiba didn't scream like a little girl though, nope. For fuck's sake, Hiba, learn to watch your surroundings. Sakura reprimanded as she accidentally stepped on something that made a crunching noise. All four of them paused in anxious silence. Nobody seemed to move for a few seconds as Sakura fought down a panic attack. Did I step on something important? I did, didn't I? Please tell me it's not going to rip my leg off. She rambled. Shikamaru took a small step back, as did Kiba and Tenten, who were looking like they didn't want to be there right now. You guys aren't helping. Sakura shouted and Tenten replied, hey, my life's at stake here, better you than me. No, that was my sister's favorite vase. A voice had called out. Shikamaru looked behind him and saw a man struggling under an endless sea of scrolls and other junk as he appeared right before Sakura and looked down on the destroyed object that was crushed under Sakura's heel. My sister's porcelain vase. I was looking for that for days. The older man said as he leaned down on the floor as tears fell from his eyes. She's going to kill me. He muttered, earning a sweat drop from the four genin. Ryugamine-sensei. Another voice called out. This time a girl wearing thick eyeglasses stepped out from a door as she noticed her superior looking as if his dog had just been killed. The girl had white hair extending to her upper back and was as messy as her current workplace. Her skin was almost the same color as her hair, but not by much, as pale as alabaster. She wore a white long coat above a standard black yukata underneath. If there was one thing to describe her, it was as if she hadn't been outside for too long. Her superior, identified as Ryugamine-sensei, appeared to be middle-aged. He had hair just as messy, if not more, as if he had put his finger in an electrical socket. He was as tall as Ino's father and wore the same uniform as the girl. He also looked like he hasn't shaved in days, judging from what the genin could tell. Ah, Shiho, just when I found out that my sister's vase was here, it was suddenly destroyed. Now she's going to kill me after she finds out about this. Shikamaru took this time to finish up any more forms of distraction by clearing his throat. Excuse me, we're the team that the Junin commander sent to clean up the place. Shikamaru failed to mention that said Junin commander who requested to have all the departments some semblance of order was his father. The two presumed members of the R&D department turned to the owner of the voice and looked at Shikamaru with a questioning look. But we didn't ask for any. Ryugamine replied with a confused tone and was subsequently cut off by Tenten. You didn't. The Junin commander just said that we couldn't have this place in disarray now that we need more stuff to come into play. She replied. Sorry about your vase, Ryugamine-san. Sakura apologized. In her mind, her other self rambled. This wouldn't have happened if your place wasn't such a pigsty, Cha. The adult of the bunch then sighed and dropped his head. It's fine, although that vase costs more than my house right now, there's nothing to be done about it. Just don't use any of the prototypes or weapons I have lying around here. Shiho bowed her head to the department's guests. I'm sorry for causing you some trouble. As you can see, we barely managed to keep things in check here with all of the research Ryugamine Sensei's team has been doing. I was sent here from the decryption department to help out since most of Ryugamine Sensei's employees have been in the hospital these past few days. Kiba raised an eyebrow at this and asked, because of the invasion, right? Ryugamine looked partly ashamed at this as his current assistant answered, yes, partly. Though there were some accidents that involved a lot of things here in the building. Ryugamine laughed nervously at that. Ah ha ha, I guess I shouldn't have some of my stuff lying around here, huh? All four of the genin glared at the man quite intensely. 2 hours later, Kiba had to admit, Ryugamine was a cool guy, in an odd sort of way. Although he was damn well sure that Ryugamine was smart, he was laid back. He was often airheaded at times when doing his work and frequently left his notes and some stuff lying around his office which made a mess of things. To him and to Shikamaru, he was what they would call your average typical guy with a brilliant mind. As he arranged some of the scrolls back into a shelf or into a container with Shiho's help, he saw Sakura curiously looking at some of the equipment and gadgets the good professor had in his office. Shiho was just as nice as her temporary superior. Kiba noted that Shiho had a cheerful personality despite her disheveled appearance. She was all smiles as she told stories of her career in the decryption department and how she felt right at home at her current job. She told him that she was one of the many failed genin of the exams handed to them by their assigned Junin captains and that she was a part of their batch. The difference, though, was that Konoha offered some of the failed genin positions in the various different departments that awaited them should they fail. Shiho took the decryption department no questions asked and had never looked back since. Wow, and I thought being in R&D involved dissecting dead people or something. Kiba commented on Shiho's stories about the department that they were currently in. Oh no, we do that, though this specific division of R&D is more responsible for engineering weapons. The biochemistry department is responsible for researching poisons and antidotes, and the human dissection is more appropriate for the medical section. That's mostly handled at the hospital along with the forensics department. Shiho replied helpfully. While Kiba and Shiho engaged in idle chatter as they helped in cleaning the place up, Tenten and Sakura were on their own little world as they looked around the building, carefully handling the more delicate apparatus and equipment around the room. That involved a lot of untested weapons and Tenten was drooling at the sight of a long-sheathed nodashi that was lying on the floor with mystified eyes. In the meantime, Sakura was looking at an intricately designed pair of gauntlets that had 4 giant cogwheels divided by pairs and placed on the forearm part of the gauntlets that was interconnected by wires. Through it all, Ryugamine was directing them where to place the items and gave little quips to the 2 kunoichi that were handling them. Hey, Ryugamine-san, I heard that you were researching on applying functional seals with metallurgy. Is this one of your experiments? Tenten asked as she handed the nodashi to Ryugamine. The head of the engineering division scratched his head for a few seconds, trying to recall the work he had done on this weapon before replying. I think this is one of my earlier prototypes. This is KNT-01, codenamed Suiginto, Mercurial Blade. It allows the user's chakra to be converted to Suiden chakra regardless of affinity by a noticeable series of sealing arrays by the handle going to the hilt and then performing a limited Suiden jutsu around the user, I'd say just about 1.5 meters. Sakura scratched her head at this. Prior to his death, Momochi Zabuza could perform Suiden jutsus much larger and further reaching than that. It seems like a complete waste of chakra for her. That doesn't sound so impressive. Sakura commented, but Ryugamine begged to differ. On first sight it is, but due to the aspects that have been given to Suiginto and the mechanics of the Suiden jutsu used in it, it's surprisingly a very effective tool. The cost for making this bad boy, though, is pretty steep. So for now, I'm stuck with that until I have enough funds to create a new one from scratch. Why is it expensive? Sakura asked. Ryugamine adjusted his glasses and replied, the nodashi was made from different chakra-conducting metals. I needed that so the complex sealing array wouldn't destabilize a single ore. Not to mention, I had to hire a professional blacksmith to create the sword. That took me 2 to 3 months before being able to create the sealing array that took me another 2 months. An idea began forming in Tenten's head. Say, Ryugamine-sensei, if I offered my services in creating more weapons like these, would that lessen the cost? I can help you with the metallurgy. I've had a chance to work at a weapons shop and create tons of blades. Not to mention I'm a kunoichi that gets to travel everywhere. I'm sure I can ease your problems with these. Ryugamine had a thoughtful look on his face and said to himself, well, that would cut the costs down considerably and I can try to create more. But are you sure? I mean, stuff like this isn't really easy. I'm perfectly fine with it as long as I can own something like Suiginto. Tenten replied. Another few seconds came by as Ryugamine hummed in thought. Finally, he agreed, causing Tenten to whoop in joy. Sakura had her jaw drop from that easy bargaining from the chief of the engineering division of this sage-forsaken building. Enough of that though, it was time to feed her own brand of curiosity. Hey, Ryugamine-san, what is this pair of gloves? They look really complicated and more mechanical. Ah, well, that's an invention of the team that wanted to involve themselves more in mechanical engineering. It's a product of a new invention, serial code KMB Alpha, codenamed Tetsu no Sogyo, Twin Fish of Iron. I know, terrible name, but we're coming up with a better one as soon as we find another. Instead of that thing relying purely on chakra, we've decided to reduce the amount needed to produce enough kilograms of force to punch through a building 4 times over by using machinery enhancers. If it were anybody else, they would have regretted hearing Ryugamine babbling on endlessly about math and science, but to Sakura, this fascinated her. Maybe if she could get a deal the way like he did with Tenten, although with a different bargain, she too could have a chance to check out these toys to play with. It never hurt to have something helping you, anyway. With the only problem being that it isn't durable enough to withstand an impact to keep it intact. Ryugamine finished, a hand on his chin as he hummed once more and looked at the pair of gauntlets. Did you guys try to reinforce it with chakra? Sakura asked, while Tenten looked disbelievingly at Sakura, who had just managed to keep up with Ryugamine's particularly long and unnecessary jargon. By this time, the professor's shoulders had dropped before continuing. Sadly, the only thing that can keep this from falling apart after the impact is a body-enhancing Doden Jutsu or something of the sort. I could communicate with one of the divisions, but that would be a long and difficult joint research project unless we could get a hold of a jutsu that is sufficient enough to make it durable. Sakura sighed at that notable disadvantage. The weapon sounded so cool and practical too. Maybe Kakashi-sensei would have an idea in how to make this work. Another item caught her interest. This time, it was a brown backpack with 3 straps, 2 vertical for the shoulders and 1 horizontal just for the waist. What made the bag unique though, were the 2 horn-like protrusions on each side of the aforementioned bag, and a giant kanji letter for sword was placed on the inside of the bag. Sakura made a grab for it and asked the professor, who was busy cleaning up his messy desk. What about this one? Ryugamine had a raised eyebrow as he looked closer, with his right hand holding his chin. He hummed once again before replying. Well, that's one of my latest creations. It's a storage power pack. It siphons chakra from the user with very minuscule amounts and stores them up on the backpack unit until it is full. The chakra is then used to either as spare energy for the owner or an additional weapon with those chakra sabers. As if to demonstrate, Ryugamine grabbed one of the horns on the left of the bag and pulled out a small blade base about the size of a large combat knife with a chakra coating that was glowing blue and was extending for over 1.5 meters. Sakura and Tenten looked in awe at the equipment before them until Ryugamine planted the sword back into the backpack. Of course, the output needed for this is just about as precise as putting a thread at the hole of a needle. Not a lot, but certainly not so little. So far, very few have managed to have enough control in using this. I've tried remodifying the seals, but when I do, the sabers don't work. Tenten groaned at this while she mumbled to Sakura, I'm all for seals and forging, but this is out of my field, so how the hell are you keeping up with his explanations about weapon specifications? Sakura simply gave a faulty grin and replied, if you haven't noticed, I'm kind of a bookworm. Tenten merely gave a shrug and walked away, with Suiginto in hand. Naruto. 5 days later. The early morning dew was met with a loud yawn coming from Naruto, who had a tray in his hands as the cafeteria from the hotel they were staying in gave him food for breakfast. It had been a baffling 5 days since he had started training with the second stage for his new jutsu. So far, He'd had no luck. Every time he tried to push chakra into the rubber ball, it would simply shake and pop in just one hole. He had a limit on pumping the chakra inside the ball. It was as if he had been pushing chakra, but it just wouldn't be strong enough to pop the ball in his hand. Groaning in frustration, he turned his attention back to his breakfast, which consisted of grilled aji, horse mackerel, white rice, various tsukemono, Japanese pickled dishes, such as umeboshi, yume plums, and takwan, pickled daikon radish, an uncracked egg, miso soup and natto, fermented soybeans. Looking at the natto alone, Naruto's left eyelid was already twitching. To his front, he saw his supposed teacher downing the bowl of miso soup straight from the bowl to relieve some of the headache he was experiencing due to the drinking he had done last night. Jiraiya then grabbed a fruit of umeboshi from his plate with his chopsticks and gladly downed the indescribably sour dish in order to relieve him of his hangover. Damn, soup would make my kidneys explode. How much miso did they put in that thing to make it so concentrated? That's saltier than dried fish. Naruto replied in a deadpan voice, it's because you put it down the hatch faster than you could breathe it. Jiraiya was in no mood for any sort of banter right now as he picked up the sealed carton of natto. When he did open it, Naruto had to cover his nose just from the stench alone. Oh god, they reek like sweaty gym socks left for over a week. How do you even eat that? Like any normal person who doesn't have ramen for breakfast, lunch and dinner would do, put it in my mouth. Besides, it's not like I enjoy the smell too, I need to get the salty taste of the miso out of my mouth. Damn thing is so strong that it's like they made sure it was just for me. Jiraiya replied as he downed some of the natto by mixing it with the rice and a raw egg. Suddenly, Naruto had a thought flash into his mind. When Jiraiya downed the miso, it was as strong as he had said. As if the staff had made a slight mistake in adding too much miso for the soup. Inspiration had struck him as he grinned. He thought that he had been doing things wrong, and right he was. Naruto cheerfully finished his breakfast and headed out of the cafeteria as he prepared himself for training. This time, he would get things right. When he had arrived at his usual training ground, Naruto took a rubber ball in his hand once more and looked at it for a few seconds. Before he closed his eyes and began molding and kneading his chakra from within. It doesn't matter how much chakra I put in, if it isn't concentrated, if it isn't collected at a single point, then the strength of the jutsu would be useless. He imagined a white space, blank and completely devoid of anything, no distractions, no voices, nothing, just a blanket of white devoid of anything as far as he could see. His mind was cleared of any thoughts at this point as he reached forth into a zen-like state. Nothing appeared in his mind for a few seconds and he only imagined a single point at the palm of his right hand. With that point being established, Naruto started pouring chakra into that single point slowly at first and then began adding chakra to it faster and faster. Eventually, he began pouring more and more chakra, faster and faster to the point that he would require his left hand continuously pouring down chakra inside the ball and stirring his chakra within it. The ball began to shake and it rumbled, but Naruto didn't stop. He kept pouring and pouring so much that the ball destabilized its shape and the ground beneath his feet cratered by a few inches as it gave in just from the mere intensity and density of the chakra that Naruto kept on pushing and pushing inside until the ball couldn't handle any more of the pressure. Boom. And Naruto was thrown back from his position with so much force that he was careening away from the site like a bullet for at least several meters before skidding on the ground back first, with Jiraiya stopping the boy. Amazing. To think that this boy managed to perform the training non-stop and until his hands were burned from pushing so much chakra inside the ball. This brat really is persistent. I'm done with step 2, Arrow Sennin, he said with a pained smirk while Jiraiya gave him a half grin. A wonderful and splendid performance there, brat. Couldn't have done better if I do say so myself. And that thing you did with your left hand. That's pretty unique. Naruto tried to stand but found himself failing to do so when he got to his feet. He fell down again and cursed his current predicament. With nothing else to do, Naruto flipped over and gazed upon the bluish skies he had ever seen since the past week. He could hear the wind gently caressing his body and face, making his messy hair sway from the motion of it. Jiraiya sat beside him under a tree's shade as he grinned. I'm surprised you're not doing the clone training I've designed for you. Why? Naruto kept staring at the sky before giving a reply. I knew it would be the best, but I want to try and grasp your stages before moving on with the Kage Bunshin training. That's because this type of training doesn't really help me much if I want to figure things out. I could make the mistakes over and over again, but I wouldn't put it past me to not get it right after trying the same thing over and over again. Jiraiya laughed at that. True, the Rasengan wasn't something he had to come up by randomly doing samples since every stage required a trick to discover in order to progress. Multiplying the experience wouldn't do squat if he couldn't find the trick of what makes the Rasengan work. Naruto needed more polishing on his jutsu. Jiraiya knew that much, but having broken the Rasengan down to a science. That was an amazing thing to do. Jiraiya looked up from under the shade of a tree and said to himself, I guess I did the right thing even if it took me a decade to be back. The fact that I could keep the village that he lived in to be safe in my own way, the fact that I should have been there for him, and the fact that I've been living it up to my mistakes. Minato, your boy, he's going to be better than you. Aro Senin, any luck yet with your teammate? The boy suddenly asked. Jiraiya had raised an eyebrow at this and looked to his student who was still staring at the sky. Why? Well, I have a friend who might need her help. He's not really a teammate but he's a friend regardless. He got injured during the Chunin exams and we were told that his career as a shinobi might be over if it couldn't be healed. Jiraiya nodded his head at that. If he remembered correctly, a kid a year older than Naruto had suffered what was considered to be irreparable damage to his arm and leg, effectively ending his career as a shinobi of the village. Can't say she would agree with you on that one. She's gotten squeamish on her duties as of late. We'd have to find a way to make her help him without her knowing it. Jiraiya replied. Tsunade was as cranky as an old man and had the temper of a rabid animal. Along with having a horrible compulsion for gambling, approaching her with Naruto didn't seem like a good idea. Bah, you wouldn't know unless you try. Naruto waved him off as he got up. He flinched when he used his hands for support in getting up. Those chakra burns definitely hurt. Take a breather for the rest of the day, brat. Your hands need them. I can bring you up to speed on the third stage by tomorrow morning. Konoha, commander of the Chunin forces, Nara Shikaku, stood in the middle of the long table, along with the rest of Konoha's elite Chunin. Standing beside him were Shiranui Genma and Yamashiro Aoba, and extending to the far corners of this side of the table were the different clan heads that maintained order in their families in Konoha. To his front were the 4 Chunin leaders of the most prolific teams in current upstarts as well as the rest of the Chunin behind them. Shikaku took note that 3 of them had bandages wrapping around somewhere on their bodies and gauze on one side of their faces. As you may know, the village is currently on lockdown due to what happened 5 days ago. A mysterious group who call themselves the Akatsuki managed to infiltrate a village that was under my direct command. The sole perpetrator who has done such a thing is the butcher of the Uchiha clan, Uchiha Itachi. Their goals were never stated, but Hitaki Kakashi has kindly informed me of what they are. The team of Itachi and another shinobi known as Hoshigaki Kisame is supposed to be what I had feared the most, thereafter Naruto. Everybody, including most of the clan heads, frowned at this. Fortunately, Jiraiya-sama had the foresight to take Naruto along with him 2 days earlier, thus he has a 2-day lead against these 2. He will not likely be found if anything were to go by. So as we are now, we are going to formulate a plan to counter this new threat and present it before our new Hokage when he or she steps into office. Kakashi, Guy, Asuma and Kurenai, if you would step in front. The 4 of them stepped forward and Shikaku nodded. What I have in mind is a short to long-term plan. Your genin teams will have to be trained harder. The clan heads can give you that little extra, but it is up to you 4 in developing them. There will be times that team mashups and mixes will happen, but I trust you 4 to nurture your genin teams and make them battle ready within 2 years. Train them as hard as you can. The 4 of them nodded. Shikaku turned back to the crowd of Konoha's finest. This talk was going to be really long. Chapter 7. Soldier of Fortune. Sasuke leaned back to a tree just 5 in the morning as he waited for his sensei to arrive. He looked downright annoyed, forgetting the fact that his teacher would be 2 hours late yet again. Up on a branch was Sakura, who was writing something on a scroll and seemed to be thinking seriously. Sasuke snuck a glance at her scroll and seemed to have been perplexed with all the numbers and baffling equations being displayed to him. The last of the Uchiha chose to ignore this in favor of waiting for their captain to arrive. In the thought of it though, he had to wonder, where was Naruto? It had been more than a week since he had gone missing, and some of the Chunin he met kept hushing at themselves to never speak of the boy's current status. Not that Sasuke cared, but the team needed Naruto as the last member to fill in the slot. Sasuke knew that Naruto was a pivotal part of the team, even he could tell that much just from seeing what he had done. So when Kakashi came earlier, as it was much a surprise to both Sasuke and Sakura, they had to wonder at the question, where the hell was Naruto? Ah, complete attendance, that's good. We don't have Naruto, Kakashi. Sasuke stated the obvious as Kakashi raised an eyebrow at this. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Naruto was deployed on an outside mission for something really important. He's gone with a very high-profile shinobi, so there's no need to worry. That got Sasuke thinking. With the village still reeling from the attack of both Tsunade and Oto, deployment for outside missions, especially for Genin, had been suspended. So as far as he knows, Naruto wouldn't be qualified for something like that, and if he were requested by some high-profile shinobi, it must mean that the said person is someone who the council simply couldn't say no to. Sakura, normally reinforcing whatever Sasuke would say, decided for the first time to keep quiet of the whole issue. She had heard from Shikamaru just a day before that Naruto was deployed outside the knowledge of his own team. Both of the genin also took note of Kakashi's look. He had looked like he was sent through hell and back. Bandages on his forearms spiraled all the way to his elbows, and he was supported by a pair of crutches. Sakura and Sasuke noted that the last time their sensei was beaten this bad was when he was facing against Zabuza, one of the shinobi swordsmen of the Hidden Mist. What happened to you, anyway? Sasuke asked in manner of disrespect. Kakashi had always noted how both Naruto and Sasuke viewed him as a teacher. Of course, Naruto would comment on his many bad habits, but Sasuke would disregard them as nothing more than annoyances and simply shrug him off. Kakashi took note that he had to fix that part of Sasuke's attitude, or future missions involving superiors who aren't as lenient as him would prove problematic. Ah, perfect timing too. I was tasked by the Chunin commander to have some serious words with you concerning the current state that I am in and what happened a few days ago. He motioned for the two to sit down on the grass, as Kakashi did as well. There was no book in sight, and his mood changed from laid back to utter seriousness of the issue. First, let me make it clear that you need to stay calm to what I'm about to tell you, Sasuke, because this involves you as well. Kakashi noticed the scowl forming from his student's face. Gone were the perpetual frown and the apathetic look that Sasuke held and showed to the world. Somehow, the survivor of the massacre had started forming ideas in his head again. Is this about my brother? Sasuke asked, and said the last word with utter disgust. He could feel himself just spitting at the title he once had for Itachi. Correct. Now, a few days ago, when you were out and collecting your scroll from one of your warehouses, we were infiltrated by your brother. Unsurprising. As he was a former member of the Anbu, he knew the ins and outs of the village at the back of his mind. Kakashi noted how easily Itachi and Kisame had slipped under their radar. It really made him feel uneasy just at the thought of facing his former subordinate at full power with his current level. Sasuke clenched his teeth in anger, and his fists were shaking in outright fury. He stood up from his spot and asked his teacher with gritted teeth, "Why didn't anyone tell me? And what would that have accomplished? What could you have done, Sasuke?" Kakashi had retorted with another question, as Sasuke answered flippantly. "You know what I would have done. I could have killed him then and there." His voice, now louder than usual, Sakura had never seen Sasuke this enraged before. She had noted just how cool and composed he was most of the time, but there were subjects that literally made Sasuke change moods quickly and just explode in burning rage. This was a Sasuke that was completely foreign to her, to say the least. Kakashi had decided to knock his student down a peg from what he deemed as a dangerous mindset. As you are right now, you are in no position to be making that claim, Sasuke. You have yet to climb the summit where your brother stands on. To him, you are an ant, an insignificant bug. He won't even bother killing you at this point. So until you are at his level, then I suggest to tone down your killing intent, or else, Asuma, Kurenai and I shall restrain you by force. Sakura glanced around and noticed the presence of the two Chunin that were eyeing them from afar. Their genin teams were nowhere in sight. She noted that the three of them all had bandages in their person, in this case, more so to Kurenai. They had been watching the whole conversation with Team 7 ever since Kakashi had arrived. I won't try to deny you of your quest for vengeance. I have no right to hold it against you. But never, ever, jeopardize your team and put them on the line just so you could fulfill your personal vendetta. Kakashi looked at Sasuke with his own killing intent, locking Sasuke in place. Up in the distance, Asuma was whispering to Kurenai. What is he thinking? Shouldn't Kakashi's priority be to stop Sasuke's dangerous grudge against his brother? Kurenai looked at her companion and answered. Anger is deep-seated into Sasuke at this point. You should know better than to try and tell Sasuke to stop seeking revenge. His anger would hear none of it. For him, justice delayed is justice denied. The longer he has to wait to get stronger and match Itachi, the more the thought of revenge slips from his mind. His anger has no direction, but at this point, all we can accomplish is to try and point it to where Sasuke's heart should be, by being a true teammate and abandoning all thoughts that would be detrimental to the development of their entire team. Most of all, this is for his sake. So he won't die a dog's death. Sasuke has suddenly become a major player in these events, huh? Asuma asked as he took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it up. More so to the point, that the cases involving him are quite high profile. First Orochimaru, now his brother, you'd think at any time he could go insane just from the many problems that are placed on his shoulders. Asuma added as he let go a drag of smoke from his mouth. Sucks to be him. Kurenai nodded in agreement. Candid, but not uncalled for, we will see just how effective Kakashi's talk to Sasuke really is. Back with Kakashi and his team, Sasuke was clenching his fists once more in frustration just how far the gap between him and his brother had thoroughly increased. If you want strength, Sasuke, I can give it to you. The current commander of the Anbu squad has owed me a few favors in the past. I can recommend you without any further need of advance in rank. Itachi had undergone the same treatment that I'm offering you and came out of it strong enough to be put in an elite squad, my squad. But if you want to undergo the training, then you must meet the conditions that I will place in from this moment on. Sasuke looked at Kakashi in apprehension, as Kakashi made a motion for his hands and held out 3 fingers. There are 3 conditions that you must fulfill in order to get into the Anbu training program and undergo its hellish training regimen. These 3, you must fulfill at all costs, or else I will leave you here and now and hope to your ancestors that you would be spared before you are hunted down like an animal. A long silence sat between all of them. Kakashi looked at his student who had somewhat calmed down and looked as if he was thinking greatly. He should. After all, life-changing moments like this should be taken with great thought as well. He knew he shouldn't rush his student with such decisions. Kakashi-sensei. This time, it was Sakura who had cut them off with their thoughts. She looked rather anxious at what she was going to say. Second thoughts were looming in her head. It showed when she looked at Sasuke, unsure of what she was going to say but decided to push forth anyway. What did Sasuke-kun's brother want in the village anyway? Kakashi simply raised his visible eyebrow and answered perfectly without much of a stutter. That is what we don't know. What we do know is that he slipped under our radar undetected. That's something that should be alarming. Sakura quietly nodded but took note of this instead. She looked beside her and noticed Sasuke didn't look convinced of their sensei's answer too. Konoha intelligence shouldn't be this dull. For all we know, they have already guessed what Sasuke-kun's brother was after but decided to keep it a secret to everyone else. With this information, Sakura had another groan inside her head. Great, more secrets that we don't have access to. We really need to have our own conference on this matter. And she knew just who to find and settle these talks once and for all. We can't fight a war without an ounce of intelligence. We need to gather up and start thinking. She thought. Elsewhere in the village, Hyuga Heihachi had been to the latest meeting with the Chunin force when he received word that the current crop of genin who had done unexpectedly well during the Chunin exam were going to be placed on a comprehensive training program. Neji, he could understand, but his first daughter. Heihachi could tell that his daughter lacked the potential and the drive. She didn't have the natural instinct of a true Hyuga. A true, decisive and calculating clansman much like her forefathers. Much of that potential he saw with his second-born and with his twin brother's son, Neji. Those two had what it took to be true and powerful Hyuga clansmen. Hinata. Heihachi simply didn't see it. Her potential lied elsewhere, and it was that thought that simply frustrated the man to no end. Hinata was much more empathic, understanding and connecting to the world. She understood weakness, pain and all the horrors of the world in a different manner than the rest of the clan who bore the persona of calmness in the midst of chaos. Were they as cold as ice, Hinata was the opposite. Indeed, Hiashi could see such an attitude did not befit a future leader of the household. Hinata didn't have those qualities that made countless leaders of the past. She was different, a complete opposite if you will. But if her potential were to be tapped differently, then there was no way of knowing how strong she could get at any given moment. But tapping that potential was something he had never had quite any success of unearthing. Maybe she needed a different approach. He could hear the sounds of flesh slamming onto something hard, akin to wood, he had thought. At this hour, most of his clansmen were doing their duties, be it administrative or otherwise. This was usually a dead hour during the day when most of them would be doing whatever it is they feel like doing. Surprised that one member was doubling their training today, Hiashi made his way towards the dojo and was further surprised to see his nephew training his eldest daughter. Hinata-sama, your posture must not slouch, straighten your back. The reason your juken is not as effective as mine is because you are not in a proper stance. I can see why this is one of the factors that cost you your match against me. Instead of feeling discouraged, his eldest daughter looked much more determined than ever, and instead of committing mistakes again and again, her usual habits were disappearing altogether. What happened for such a thing to occur? Neji, for his part, noticed his uncle and bowed to him, Hiashi-sama. Hiashi waved his hand and let the boy be at ease. Ever since their talk after Neji lost his match against Naruto, the dynamic between his family and Neji changed. He seemed much more receptive, less hostile. Even if his face did not show any sign of happiness, it was clear that the boy seemed like a weight had been lifted on his shoulders. Hinata, why are you training now at this hour? What changed for something like this to occur? Hiashi asked, obviously puzzled to Hinata's decision all of a sudden. His daughter, with not a stutter nor a waver in her voice, finally spoke straight and true to her own father. I am doing this because I wish to gain strength. I want to be stronger, strong enough to protect my friend from all of his sadness. Hiashi raised an eyebrow at this, and what would you gain from this? What would the clan gain from this? Hinata was silent at first, but her answer showed much confidence in them, nothing. But this is of my own accord, father. I wish to protect him further from what he will experience. I wish to support him with his dream. Ah, so it was indeed Naruto, the jailer of the Kyuubi no Yoko. Upon further inspection of his daughter, he noticed the fierceness of his wife manifesting within Hinata. It was a major leap as to what she used to be, timid, shy, unsure of what to do. But now, she was acting the exact opposite. Hinata was ready to give her all to Naruto. Hiyashi's eyes were suddenly opened with a realization. Honor did not mean much to Hinata, but rather, her emotions. Her desire did not rest on such intangibles like honor, tradition and perfection. No, her motivations lied somewhere far, far more powerful. It was the thought of losing someone she loved, someone she held dear. That was something Hiashi had not, for even once, thought about when training her daughter. He had never motivated her to think that her weakness would lead to the death of the one she loved the most. But now, he finally understood. He understood her so well that he felt absolutely horrible for even treating her the way he did. Very well, do better in your training. Tomorrow morning, we shall practice what you have learned today and gauge your strength. If you wish to protect this person that you say, then you must not let even a god stand in your path. Hiashi nodded and turned away from the dojo as a thought entered his mind. Having a son-in-law potentially becoming Hokage sounded like a very tempting political gain. The elders would flip out and never let this opportunity miss. Just as long as they don't create a hostile environment on his daughters, then all should be well. It would be nice having a bigger advantage for once compared to what he has now. Do well, Hinata, and I shall do my part as the head of this clan and more importantly, as your father. Team 7. Kakashi held 3 fingers up front to Sasuke, emphasizing the 3 points he wishes to make for the Uchiha to obey to. Rule 1. You are to give respect to the current Anbu commander at all times. First name references within the Anbu will be labeled as insubordination. You will be considered as the lowest of the low during your stay, and as such, you are expected to follow your orders unquestionably. Sakura looked quite nervous at that. She had heard of stories about the harsh training conditions that Anbu had to be put through. During the first test alone, only about 10% of entrants will be admitted into the squad, and from there, the training will only get harsher. Sasuke didn't seem to phase for a minute there before he nodded. Falling in line and following orders were no problem for him, as long as the one that gives him commands was superior to him in every way. Second rule. You are not to divulge any secrets that the Anbu have. Share them, and you will be cut down for treason. Anbu are silent, they are the shadow of the Hokage himself. So much as a peep out of your mouth about the workings and mission logs of the Anbu, then you are guaranteed to have a session with Morino Ibiki. Third rule, and it's the most important one. Your loyalty is only to Konoha and the Hokage. You will be assigned missions that can make you disillusioned at times, even question your loyalty due to missions that will surely leave a bad taste in your mouth. But you must know that what you are doing is for the sake of the village. Those are the rules of the Anbu that you must never disobey. They are the principles that guide the shadow of the village and the path that you must only see. Sasuke remained quiet and then looked down. Kakashi noticed that Sasuke seemed contemplating on the offer. He was being offered a chance to become a member of the elite forces that work directly under the Hokage. How could he pass something like that up? If I become a member of the Anbu, will I be stronger than Itachi? Kakashi answered him straight away, that is for you to find out. Are you willing to take the necessary step, Sasuke? Sasuke never hesitated on his answer and he gave a nod. Very well. Applicants are to be under intense training from a member or former member before they can enter. Luckily for you, I was a former commander of an entire squad. This will be your initiation starting now. I want you to run around the entire village 10 times at its perimeter. Come back here within 30 minutes or else you will be severely punished while I tend to Sakura. Sasuke seemed surprised at that but obeyed nonetheless. When Sasuke disappeared from their sights, Kakashi grabbed a scroll from his pouch and tossed it over to Sakura, who caught it with ease. I've heard from some of the members of the R&D that you are in possession to one of its most recent projects. I've asked a few of the members what it was and I was surprised that you were allowed to have it. Kakashi pointed to the newly acquired accessory Sakura had on her back. The scroll on the girl's hand exploded into smoke and changed into what was apparently a shinai. I've planned to teach this to you three once you were capable enough. But this is as good a time as any. Learning Kenjutsu will be demanding, especially for you Sakura. But out of your teammates, you are the most inexperienced and perhaps, the least effective fighter there is. So now, I'm going to teach you how to use your newly acquired equipment effectively. Remember, I'm serious about your survival. So if you want to survive, then you must take everything that I have to offer. That includes the pain that I will unfortunately dish out and to have your body memorize that pain and adapt to my teachings. Sakura gulped at Kakashi's statements at that. She knew she was going to have bruising throughout the day. She gripped the shinai with her hands and went into a simple Chunin no Kame mid-level stance. Sakura, your stance is wrong. Your shoulders are too stiff. You will never achieve a clean cut if your shoulder muscles are not relaxed. Do it again. Her sensei had seemingly changed from a laid-back soft-spoken instructor, to a hard-nosed, sharp-tongued superior. Sakura knew then and there that she was in complete hell. Shikamaru appreciated the tranquility of their home when his mother was not around or when his father wasn't snoring in his room. The sound of bamboo hitting the stone of their small pond was the only thing that echoed in their house and he could feel the serenity of peace lingering in his mind. So, who decided that you're going to be the one that would watch over us, anyway? His thoughts were cut off when a bishop had just entered his line and took down a rook. Shikamaru leaned forward towards the board and then to his opponent. It was the Suna Kunoichi from the Chunin exams. He had never understood why his father would assign him with chaperoning one of their prisoners into his home in the first place. They were on house arrest, he saw no logic of setting at least one of them free. Put it up to my father. He's the one who assigned me for this. He said the village need the genin to do some of the grunt work while the Junin try to maintain order in the village. Shikamaru replied, placing his knight to where Temari's bishop once stood. The girl scowled. And you're not complaining? Temari asked. She knew his type. The boy in front of her was the kind of guy that would complain to just about anything and not do anything about it. Shikamaru merely shrugged at her question before he answered. Not that I have a choice in the matter. Your invasion cost us a lot of good men and women. Frankly, I still don't trust any of you that participated in the attack. The girl winced at her opponent's lack of tact. She knew that his words hit her hard. Shinobi die in battles a lot of times, it's in our job description. Was her only defense to his words. Shikamaru knew when and how to speak to any person despite his attitude. I know, and we kicked your asses because of it. Not only that, the village is making you as bargaining pieces for Suna. Their Jinchuriki is a pricey chip after all. I'm sure they can work it out between our two villages. Tamari once more winced at his words. The girl noted the treatment her youngest sibling has within the walls of her village. If anything, they would be glad to get rid of Gaara. This didn't go unnoticed by Shikamaru, and he raised one eyebrow at her reaction. So it's like that too, huh? No wonder he's gone crazy. Shikamaru noticed a slip on Temari's strategy and decided to attack aggressively with his knights. What would you know about Jinchuriki? You don't know a damn thing. I don't. Shikamaru had cut in and then looked at her in the eye. But I can make objective observations. Gaara is a mere product of what your village has done. Childish innocence gets destroyed the moment that they realize that they have no one to turn to. Do you know how damaging it is mentally to a child who has no one that he or she can grab onto? No, you probably don't. You've probably been pampered because you're the children of your cage. Gaara is too. He's our youngest sibling. Yet he holds contempt that is deep-seated within him. Do you know how anger works? Gaara holds contempt to the world for shunning him, and in return, just as a child would, he would do the same. That's how it is normally. He holds the world responsible to his pain because he has nothing to gain from anything, and like a child, he would be petulant about it, defiant and antagonizing. He would create his own moral code because nothing will stop him from doing so. If the world around him hurts him, then he would react accordingly based on his own beliefs. And you should know how dangerous that is. Tamari looked down. Her emotions were somewhat calmed by Shikamaru's objective reasoning. Her opponent had been right to the letter about his assessment. The world isn't a wonderful place, it's terrible. I understand that. But what makes a child's life worthwhile is the life that he gains with those that should be the ones that give him affection. A child is selfish, but let him be selfish. He has little understanding on the concepts of altruism and sacrifice like an adult. That is something that you should have understood the moment Gaara was tormented by the people around him. Shikamaru inwardly slapped his face at his own hypocrisy. Then again, he had not known much. A benefit that he learned when he knew about Naruto's condition was a form of empathy he had little understanding back then. But now, he had deduced himself well, and he would make it up to his friend by getting to know him better. I know that. I know all of that. But what could a kid do? My father isolated both of us from Gaara. He separated us, made us complete strangers to him. He alienated us from our youngest sibling. My mother was so happy when she was pregnant with Gaara, but when she died, we couldn't associate with Gaara anymore. I tried to get close to him. I did, but by then he turned to something that made me fear him. Tamari punched the floor of Shikamaru's home, making the wooden floors crack from the sheer force embedding her arm within it. Shikamaru remained quiet for a time, when he finally heard sobs coming from the girl. Tamari was a strong woman, that much he knew. But she was also human, and as human circumstances go, she was also fallible with her emotions, just like any other human. I distrusted my father after his actions. He was willing to torment his own child. He would not hesitate to kill my brother. Shikamaru had suddenly grown some disdain at the cage. And Shikamaru's thoughts and beliefs were reaffirmed once more when he knew. This was a cruel world that they lived in. He hadn't realized fully until the very end of their conversation, how he grew somewhat cold in a span of weeks after the invasion. This was not the empathy that he had thought about before. He could only watch as Tamari let her emotions finally let out. It was a terrible sight to see on her mind, but she couldn't care less anymore. It was rather unfortunate of Shikamaru when his mother had walked in on them, and upon seeing Tamari cry, decided to reprimand his son for his attitude. Shikamaru sighed and massaged his temples. This world really is cruel. Konoha. Night time. Sakura had to help Sasuke up as she aided him to his home. For better or worse, the brunt of Kakashi's sadistic attention was brought to Sasuke. She had some of it as well, but he was not as harsh. She couldn't tell if their sensei was showing favoritism or not. Or, maybe Kakashi just liked to be sadistic now. Maybe he was showing his true colors now. Sakura had thought it was possible, but then she remembered Kakashi's speech to him earlier. He'll do whatever it takes to make sure they survived. Her thoughts were derailed when she saw Shikamaru just across the street, who happened to have escorted Tamari back in her hotel room with her siblings, while Hinata stood just in between the two, greeting with a polite curt. Shikamaru noticed Sakura's expression was filled with questions. The only conscious male of the three tilted his head to a nearby barbecue joint indicating that they had something to talk about. Sakura shook her head, pointing to her knocked-out teammate, and Shikamaru simply smirked as he went inside, indicating that Sakura should follow anyway. Sighing, Sakura had to comply anyway and watched as Hinata entered the stand. Sakura went inside with Sasuke in tow and placed the boy at the edge of the bench leaning on to a wall and nudged him awake. Sasuke-kun, before I could take you home, you need to eat. Sakura added helpfully. Sasuke looked around him and noticed not only was his teammate there, but there were Shikamaru and Hinata as well. They all looked at him rather expectantly. The boy merely replied with a nod and leaned back. The pain in his body was palpable. It hurt to even sit down. So why did you invite us to talk, Shikamaru? Sakura turned to the strategist who was looking sideways before answering her with a low voice. I heard what happened to your sensei and how you're all not supposed to have missions for a while. I've been meaning to ask Dad about it. Apparently there was a commotion a few days prior when Sasuke was out of the village. But he's surprisingly tight-lipped about it, saying that I already knew too much. He said as he leaned back while Sasuke clicked his tongue in distaste as he was reminded about Kakashi's reasons. Why should I tell anything? As far as I can tell, it's not like you to poke your nose in on anyone's business, Shikamaru. Sasuke replied. He winced a little as he adjusted his sitting position. He was starting to hate the fact that he was forced to sit down here and socialize. Shikamaru narrowed his eyes to Sakura and Sasuke before he spoke. So you already know the answer, and judging from Sasuke's predisposition, it upsets him quite a bit. Maybe it's a little personal, then. Shikamaru stated, and Sasuke clicked his tongue. This is pointless. I didn't ask to be questioned by someone who has nothing to do with our team or our business. Sasuke replied, but just as he was to leave the table, he staggered once more and he leaned back to his chair once more because of the pain. Shikamaru looked wordlessly at the stoic member of Team 7, and just as he was about to speak, the quiet girl beside him spoke. They're keeping secrets from us. Everything is piling up. We may not have anything to do with your team, but we have every right to know what is going on in our village. We cannot protect Konoha if even we are kept in the dark. Hinata answered. Shikamaru smirked at Hinata's newfound courage to the people around her, a subtle but very positive change, he noted. A few seconds of silence was settled within the quartet as their meals were presented to them and the meat and vegetables were grilled in front of them. Tough luck then, that I already know what happened a few days ago. I received the news from Asuma-sensei when he too was hospitalized. It's just I wanted to hear it come from your team, Sasuke, because I cannot believe the amount of shit that's piled on your team. I may be prying into it, but your brother wouldn't come back here without a reason. This time, it was finally Sakura who spoke up. That's what I would like to know. What were the motives of Sasuke-kun's brother to come back here in the village? Being the son of the Chunin commander, I always knew that you may have the answers. Shikamaru shook his head. It's unfortunate. Even my old man is tight-lipped on the situation. I won't be able to get that information out of him unless I do my own digging, and quite frankly, everybody I know who is Chunin or higher are determined to keep this down. So, you can't give us the information we need? Sakura asked. Shikamaru shook his head and then looked at Sasuke before he answered. Oh, I could probably give you an answer in a few days. But some of the answers that I could obtain would be conjectures at best, so I won't be able to give you solid proof to that. I don't want to be labeled as a conspiracy nut, that would be a pain. Sakura turned to Hinata and asked her this time, what about you, Hinata-san? Do you have an idea? Hinata shook her head. Unfortunately, even Kurenai-sensei is silent on what Uchiha Itachi's motive is. She seemed unusually evasive of the topic. Sakura sighed. Now even more secrets. How deep does the rabbit hole go, anyway? Judging from the Chunin, I'd say it's pretty deep. But until we can stop with conjectures, we won't be able to act accordingly and prepare. So I say we need to cool it until new information surfaces. Hinata nodded for once and then looked at Sakura to change the topic. Sakura-san, may I ask where Naruto-kun is right now? He's been sent on a separate mission. We don't know who pulled him out, but we're guessing it was some big shot within Konoha's ranks if he could pull strings like that. We're not allowed to take missions outside right now, remember? Sakura replied with a little smile as she leaned forward when Hinata blushed a little. The girl can be so cute at times when she's around Naruto or with even a mention of his name. Hinata nodded and then looked at Shikamaru. Whatever the case may be, we'll have to dig around for more info. I'm sure whoever pulled out Naruto for this mission, if he could throw his weight around like that, then he'll be in good hands. Hinata sighed in relief. Elsewhere. We have to get out of here now. Jiraiya shouted as he grabbed a startled blonde who was concentrating on his balloon to not let it pop before being grabbed by the waist and subsequently carried by his sensei. Come back here, pig. Take your supposed beating like a man, shouted one of the women from behind them. Naruto just sighed in exasperation with his sensei. Naruto looked at his teacher with a deadpan face as he was being carried by his teacher. You just can't stop thinking with your dick, can you, Rasengan? Castrate him. Yikes. Konoha. Why, you're right, I'm sure he'll be fine. Hinata answered as they all began to dig in. Can you ascertain as to what Itachi's motive is to enter the village? I'm sure he'll try again sometime in the future. Sasuke finally spoke as he ate. The conversation had taken a turn for his interest. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow at this but then replied calmly. Suddenly taking interest, huh? Give or take a few days. This is detective work, the like of which I need to have confirmations first. Snooping around the mission logs would definitely cost me, so the best that I can give you are, like I said, conjectures. But you need to understand that you need to be patient, Sasuke. I know that a mere mention of your brother's name drives you on edge, but you need to be calm about it. Your revenge would be for nothing if you die by his hands. Sasuke nodded. Even though it felt like he was using them to his personal gain, he felt a little bit of weight lift from his shoulders when Shikamaru had offered his services to help. It felt somewhat helpful to him. Don't worry. By the time he returns to the village once more, I'll be ready for him. Somehow, Shikamaru felt Sasuke's determination seep through. It seemed there were things that Naruto imparted unconsciously in all of them. He could only give a grin. Outskirts of Tanzaku City, 5 days later, morning. Naruto stared at the balloon in his right hand. He felt that he was getting closer and closer to finally mastering this jutsu. Determination setting in, Naruto had set out to do just that. All the while following his teacher around as he gathered information. This time, Naruto had decided not to be left behind to supervise his sensei. Naruto sighed in annoyance at how it was supposed to be the other way around. The pervert had cost them their accommodations in the last town. He was not about to let it happen with this one just because Jiraiya decided to be a jackass and invaded the women's side of the bath. Well, the last informant said that Tsunade was going here. Wouldn't be a bad choice too. Tanzaku City is famous as a gambling hotspot, legal or illegal. The man said as he used the telescope in his bag to survey the town from afar. Just remember your job, Rasengan. I don't want a repeat of 5 days ago. Naruto reminded the older man who sighed in exasperation. One time, Naruto, one time. Yeesh. You let one thing happen and the next thing you know they're not letting you live it down. Then do your damn job. You're supposed to be searching for your teammate. I'm not the one who's supposed to be keeping you in line. Why the hell does a 12-year-old have to be the one to watch over you? Naruto reminded his lecherous master of his tendency to neglect duty over his unhealthy habit of voyeurism. Killjoy. Jiraiya snidely commented, making Naruto a little angrier. When you say it like that, it sounds like you're having one of those moments where you try to live out your youth again, Rasengan. The blonde mentioned, earning a raised eyebrow from the older of the two. You mean a midlife crisis? When you put it like that, Jiraiya trailed off and his shoulders slumped down as if he was being reminded of what being a hermit was all about. I never got to settle down and have a woman in my life, the gloom radiated from the old man, earning a little chuckle coming from the blonde. But as soon as Jiraiya's realization had hit him, he quickly recovered, surprising even Naruto and forcing the balloon in his hand to pop. But that's okay. My love cannot be contained by one woman alone. I, the great toad sage Jiraiya, have enough love to go around to all the beautiful women in the world. He proclaimed proudly, earning a deadpan look from Naruto. That has to be the stupidest excuse that I've heard in my entire life. And I've met Kakashi sensei. Naruto proceeded to dismiss him as he grabbed another rubber balloon in his bag and started blowing air within it. Inside him, Kurama huffed and thought, that's saying something, coming from an idiot. Suffice to say, the whole day that they were searching, Jiraiya realized that Naruto was his golden Buddha at the casinos and even the lottery. A little over a few conversations earlier, he was dragged into a game and Naruto had accidentally blown away a set of dice that were meant for something else and turned into Jiraiya's bet. Astounded by the kid's luck, he fooled his apprentice into several games such as blackjack and even the slot machines. The kid won close to 500,000 Ryo in a span of 3 hours and he didn't even have a fucking clue to what was happening around him. He even managed to turn the tide at a game of poker, for goodness sake. I'll bite your call and raise you 100. One of the high-rolling players said, looking at Naruto with sweat pouring down his face in the bucket loads. On his front, the blonde was looking rather confused at his pair of cards and got impatient and decided to throw all of the chips he had onto the table. Of course, he didn't know that the chips had a cost of 1,000 or more per piece. But Naruto thought the game was boring and frankly, his jutsu wasn't even finished yet. Everyone looked at the steel brass balls that the kid was displaying and looked in awe. Jiraiya was figuratively biting his nails and cursing the blonde for betting his entire money on his cards. His opponent looked like he wasn't going to back down. He had a good pair on his hands and on the river already. He had a king and a queen, a very good hand indeed. There was a king and a queen on the river, followed by a pair of twos that were a spade and a club and a single ace of diamonds. He looked at the blonde as he looked down on the river with pure disinterest and the man misinterpreted the blonde's non-verbal cue as a taunt. Getting a little over his head, the man pushed all of his chips down to the center of the table as well and showed his cards immediately. Everyone looked in shock at the two pairs sitting nicely just below the king and queen's river. Naruto, on the other hand, displayed his set of cards to the floor and the man's jaw literally dropped at the cards Naruto had. An ace of spades and a two of diamonds. And instantly, Naruto's income tripled from 500,000 to 1.5 million Ryo. The man fainted on the floor as to how much he had lost against a child who had fooled him thinking he didn't know anything about the game of cards. Jiraiya quickly ran over to the boy's side of the table and patted the boy on the back. By the lucky stars, the boy routed a high-rolling gambler with a full house. My apprentice has been blessed by the goddess of luck, I'm so happy I could just. Can we go now? The blonde asked. Jiraiya most certainly nodded and walked away, along with 30% of the winnings that Naruto had with him and a grin so big it threatened to tear his face in two. His happy mood suddenly changed when he heard and felt a low rumble coming from somewhere a little farther. Naruto felt the sensation too, but Jiraiya stopped him then and there. Cash your chips in at the teller by the edge of the building to your right. Meet me back at the hotel after this all blows over. But no buts. To where I'm going, you'll only get in the way. This is an order from your master, Naruto. Out there might be Tsunade and if my instincts are telling me, she's throwing a fit. You do not want to be in Tsunade's warpath once that happens, trust me on this one. Jiraiya had cut him off and disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Naruto sighed as an assistant came to help him carry his chips over to the bank and exchange them for cash. The blonde reluctantly obeyed his master only because the perverted hermit looked unusually serious compared to his behavior he had earlier. Tanzaku Castle. Jiraiya had arrived at the scene, weary and most likely anxious. From the smoke and debris that he could see from the distance, he could tell that a large portion of the castle had collapsed and add to that, a huge section of the wall crumbled in on itself, destroyed most likely by his female teammate. When he had arrived, he had expected for Tsunade to be in a sour mood and quite right he was. She was scowling and her hands were clenched into fists while she was staring at nothing in particular. That meant that Tsunade had met someone to have pissed her off. Now who could that be? Well, isn't this a sight for sore eyes? I get to see two of my former teammates in one day. What are the chances of that happening? She opened to Jiraiya. The toad sage right then and there looked serious. She had encountered Orochimaru and by the looks of things, he got under her skin too much for what Tsunade needed. Tsunade. Jiraiya greeted with a nod before he jumped down from the tiles above and landed beside her and her assistant. What did you come here for? Are you here to make an offer for me too? She asked rather abrasively, affirming Jiraiya's observations to be true. No, I came here to talk about something. We can settle this over a cup of sake. Jiraiya had mentioned, hoping that the alcohol would help lighten the mood. Tsunade looked apprehensive for a few moments but complied. Whatever it was, she really needed that drink as memories of years past suddenly wore down on her and felt the need for something mind-numbing. Her assistant beside her, Shizune brought her out of her thoughts when she spoke to Jiraiya. Jiraiya-sama, I don't think this is the time to. Tsunade decided to cut her off. Shizune, no. I want some sake right now. Jiraiya clapped his hands together and grinned. Good, at least we can try to catch up over at dinner. I'm paying, by the way. An angel just gave me a good amount of money a little earlier. Oh, you managed to swindle some poor girl. I knew you were a scumbag, but I never thought you would sink so low as to leech off of someone. Tsunade commented dryly. Jiraiya simply huffed and replied. I don't want a lecture coming from the vagabond that is wasting her family's fortunes away by gambling. It's not like I can't afford it anyway, I'm a best-selling author, after all. Jiraiya replied proudly, earning a look from Tsunade that made her sick of her teammates' pride on erotic novels. Let's just get that sake now before I change my mind. Jiraiya's suggestion for dinner before getting wasted seemed like a good offer, though. It's not like she was the one paying anyway. Right then, I'll lead the way and we'll start after we get dinner. Let's make our way to the hotel I'm staying. I hear the food's great there. Probably the alcohol too, but that is beside the point, now. Tsunade replied as they made their way towards the hotel he and Naruto were staying at. Once they made it to the restaurant, they met a little blonde kid with spiky hair and whisker marks on his cheeks and was carrying a leather suitcase that greeted Jiraiya. Tsunade noticed the forehead protector and the Chunin vest he was wearing, showing the blonde's occupation as a shinobi of Konoha, probably Chunin level. His appearance was a startling resemblance to her deceased little brother back then. You're back already, Orochimaru. Hey, can you believe that all those chips that I won were actually worth something? Oh man, I have so much money right now from playing all of those boring ass games that I don't know where to spend it all. Oh, and yeah, you wanted 30%, right? Well, here's the envelope you wanted. The lady at the cashier said it's worth 450,000 ryo. I had that put there because I asked the teller about the numbers and stuff. Tsunade stumbled a bit when she heard the amount of money her perverted teammate was getting. How in the actual fuck was that even possible? Her voice shaking, she asked her teammate, who is this kid? Jiraiya looked back at Tsunade with a raised eyebrow while he was counting the money in the small envelope and grinned at her. Why, he's my new apprentice, Tsunade Haim. He's practically blessed by the goddess of luck and I would appreciate it if you would not exploit him that way. So this was the latest vessel for the Kyuubi no Yoko. She thought, but it only came more as an afterthought when Tsunade drooled at the possibility of winning so much with that child. She can probably pay off all her debts and then some. You know, your hypocrisy about this knows no bounds, Jiraiya. Also, Orochimaru, your own apprentice doesn't even respect you. Jiraiya answered rather defensively at that. Hey, my apprentice, my rules. And he so does respect me. No, I don't. The blonde replied with a deadpan that made Jiraiya turn to his apprentice and said, you should at least back up your master when he's being falsely accused, brat. You owe me your win at the Chunin exams. Tsunade laughed at Jiraiya's misfortune as they entered the restaurant. Naruto decided to plop the suitcase down at his front and opened the said item to see stacks of money neatly compiled and fitted in the bag. Tsunade's greed and jealousy were already kicking in, as did astonishment and wonder. I don't think I've ever seen something so glorious to this day. Mon, I have this much money right now, I wonder where I'll spend all of this. Naruto imagined himself buying so much ramen that he'd be swimming in it by the time he was done. Jiraiya coughed and lectured his apprentice on the value of money. Kid, there are 3 vices that shinobi should avoid, and that's sake, women and money. All that money shouldn't be spent so flippantly, you need to have some control over it or it will control you. Tsunade, Shizune, Naruto and the pet pig all had an eyebrow raised as they looked at Jiraiya with total disbelief. Are you seriously hearing yourself say this horseshit, Jiraiya? Tsunade asked incredulously at her teammate because she explicitly remembered her teammate violating the same rules and is even worse than her. Jiraiya merely ignored that comment. As if to further prove his point, Jiraiya added, look at what money did to my teammate over here. As you can see, she's a homeless bum because she wasted it all away because of her own greed and addiction. You wouldn't want to be like her one day. Jiraiya, you might be paying for dinner, but I'll knock your block off and snap your spine like a twig if you keep this up. Jiraiya knew when to shut up and let his ill-tempered teammate cool off, or else he'd probably be at death's door once more. And he has been there one too many times already. When the food came, Jiraiya had leaned in front of the table with both elbows and covered his mouth as he was about to speak. Tsunade noticed the seriousness of the situation and remained quiet. She always knew things were really serious when it was Jiraiya was looking pretty damn focused. Compared to Orochimaru or her, Jiraiya had a knack of controlling the environment around him. If he wanted to be serious, people would listen and tensions began to rise. This was something she had known for quite a while. Sarutobi-sensei died the day of the invasion in Konoha and the village is without a Hokage. The elders and the council have decided that you be the successor to both the Yondaime and to Sarutobi-sensei. Tsunade raised her eyebrow at this and disputed, before they could ask me, I'm sure they asked you first, Jiraiya. The Toad Sage nodded but replied, they did. But I had to decline that offer. There are multiple factors that prevent me from taking the position, such as maintaining the spy networks that I've set up around the world and laying out what I've planned for the longest time. Then it's a smart decision that you didn't take it then. Being Hokage is only a fool's dream. By then the room had gone eerily silent. Naruto stopped counting the bills in his suitcase and closed it shut. He looked at the person who had dared to insult all of the Hokages that came and lead the village of Konoha to where it was today. He had finally taken in sight the woman that was sitting right across Jiraiya's side. The most eye-catching feature that could be noted from this woman was the size of her bust. Hell, anyone could probably notice it, even women. Second was her blonde hair. Tied into two pigtails, her hazel brown eyes were staring at Jiraiya, the whole looking with disappointment but with conviction. She wore a sleeveless kimono that was covered in a modified green haori that had the sleeves reach just below her elbows. The woman had a purple diamond mark on her forehead. What it was, he didn't know, nor would he give a fuck about it. She had said something that really pissed him off. What did you say? He asked, in a rude fashion that could have resulted in him butting heads with anyone within a 10-meter radius. You heard me, brat. Being Hokage sucks. Only idiots would dream to have a job like that. By now, Naruto was reaching the limits of his very little amount of patience. So he slammed the table with his hand and pointed to the woman in between her eyes. You've got a lot of nerve calling all of the Hokages as idiots, lady. I don't give a fuck about what your problem is with the Hokages, but you just insulted those that went before you in my dream. Being Hokage is an honor I'm willing to have, and a drunken gambling hobo who insults my dream doesn't have the right to criticize those who were given the title. For a moment there, Tsunade could see a little part of his little brother in this boy. But she shook her head mentally. Bringing up the dead had no place in the world of the living. Jiraiya, it seems your apprentices get uglier and uglier as time goes on. He's horrible on the manners department too. Why do you keep doing this? Tsunade asked as Jiraiya merely replied and leaned back on his seat with a smile. I told you, I have plans that took a long time. I won't disclose it here or ever. Suffice to say that brat the key to solve everything. Tsunade was looking at the kid and she felt as if he was ready to jump at her and get the chance to deal some punishment. Tsunade laughed at the thought, this kid, who looked freshly out of the academy even though he was already a Chunin. That takes some other kind of guts in her eyes. You want to take this outside, little man? Tsunade goaded. Naruto didn't need to think twice. Bring it, lady. Jiraiya had to hit his face with his palm. Once outside, Tsunade smirked at the bravado of this kid. Did he not know who he was facing against? If he knew Jiraiya, then he must have known about her. I'll tell you this just once, brat. You should throw that dream away before you get yourself killed. A fair warning would suffice for Tsunade. But the kid didn't even look like he was having any second thoughts. And I'll tell you this just this once, old hag. That I'm not giving my dream up just because some washed up has been told me to. That earned a tick mark on her forehead. Shizune flinched at her mentor's dislike on the remark of her age. This wasn't going to be pretty. Well, he's gone and done it now. Jiraiya commented as he got outside and stared at the showdown that was about to happen. Did he think of this happening when he brought the boy with him? Most certainly, but he brought Naruto with a much more reasonable justification in finding Tsunade. Naruto in a lot of ways looked and behaved just like Tsunade's younger brother, only with an additional baggage being the biju that was sealed in him. Jiraiya hoped that by bringing Naruto along, it would spark something in Tsunade that would throw her out of her game. So far, that part of the plan failed when Naruto stupidly challenged Tsunade to a fist fight. Oh, Jiraiya, Not only is your apprentice ugly, he's practically begging to be humiliated. Tsunade then held out her index finger and pointed it to the blonde. Just for you, I'll use just one finger, brat. Let's see how good a future Hokage will be against me. Naruto did not give out so much as an emotion other than pure resentment for this woman, tranquil fury being his only emotion. He leaned and charged forward without as much as a hand sign or a flare of his chakra. Jiraiya, knowing better, frowned and noticed something was up when Naruto charged straight ahead. This isn't what I taught him. Naruto is up to something. Tsunade raised an eyebrow as the blonde charged at her in a straight line. She shook her head as he reached closer and closer to her. It seemed the credentials of being Chunin was lowered since her time away from the village. A boy like this charging at her with no plan was suicide and not something a Chunin, even the newly minted ones, would have done. Naruto let out a straight hook at her and she dodged effortlessly against his attack. Before Tsunade could topple the blonde over with just one finger, there was a clone that appeared behind her with a hammer fist drawn. Tsunade sidestepped the attack as the real one jumped to the side while the clone did so as well, evading Tsunade's finger flick. Both the clones now stood on parallel rooftops and began jumping to the other as they made a weaving pattern against her. Tsunade just stood there and waited for the blonde to attack. Tsunade had to give the boy some credit. She had almost let her guard down when he charged headstrong against her like that. Naruto observed the older woman as she kept her composure against him. He understood that she was much stronger than him. A testament in battle he has known since the second part of the Chunin exam. Orochimaru toyed with them and that was something Naruto wouldn't easily forget. How the man could have just as easily killed them merely on a whim. Jiraiya, since when did this boy learn a kenjutsu? The Toad Sage smirked and replied, before I met him. Tsunade seemed slightly impressed. With that in mind, Tsunade took the first step and began to walk calmly at the fast-moving blonde and his clone. Both landed to the ground. Tsunade was placed in the middle. Naruto and his clone charged as the woman remained composed. Tsunade noted that this attack would be a feint much like the last one and that the next one would appear when she was left wide open. She smirked. A simple strategy that could have worked against any other person once, will not work on a member of the Sannin twice. She sidestepped a Naruto clone and with her index finger, poked the one on the opposite side dispelling him. Anticipating what was next, another clone had appeared from behind her ready to perform another strike that was aimed at her face. The blonde flew past her, and tapped the clone at its throat dispelling it. Now shrouded in smoke, Tsunade heard something that she would have never guessed to have come from the boy. A blue, shining orb, grinding and ringing in her ears made its appearance known from the smoke. It was the Rasengan. Jiraiya had a look of surprise in his face as he saw the jutsu of his prized student manifest in the hands of his son. It was only for a moment but he realized that something felt wrong about the boy's attack. The Yondaime Hokage's own jutsu inspired by the Bijudama that was known as many as a destructive mass of round chakra was in the hands of a boy no older than 13 years old. Suddenly feeling the urgency to end the fight there, Tsunade spun once more using her left foot as a pivot just at the same time Naruto had lunged at her with the Rasengan. Naruto sailed fast and noticed his jutsu destabilized half a second later. Time seemed to slow down once more for him as Tsunade had her index finger pointed at his forehead. With a flick of said finger, Naruto felt the force of a rampaging bull and then some slam onto him so hard that he felt every bone in his body shook from the impact. He crashed to the opposite end from Tsunade who was scowling all the while as she spoke to her teammate. Jiraiya, how careless are you to teach a brat like that with a dangerous jutsu such as the Rasengan? Jiraiya shrugged as his reply and pointed Tsunade to his student. Naruto got up from his position and was sitting as he stared at Tsunade with rage in his eyes. You lost boy, you can't even hurt me, go now with your tail between your legs. Give up. Naruto merely scoffed it off and dusted himself as he replied, give up. I don't know the meaning of those words. I'm too damn persistent for my own good when my principles and dreams are questioned. And every damn time that people do that for me, I come back fighting harder. So give it your all, hag. My dream is to be Hokage and you won't stop me from chasing it. The words of Naoki and Dan repeated themselves to Tsunade once more and she was faced with the images of her dearly departed people standing beside the blonde who was gripping his hands into fists. Alright, that seems to be enough. Jiraiya stepped forth in between the two. Naruto reluctantly relented and didn't speak any further. Tsunade had relented as well, but before she turned away she told the boy, "A kid like you will never be Hokage, that jutsu that you did earlier. Don't even hope to master it, brat. You will never be able to do it." Naruto this time turned his back to Tsunade and gave a fierce grin at her. "Don't count on it, you old hag. Give me 3 days. 3 days and I'll finish this jutsu and show it to you. And I always keep my promises. You want a bet?" Tsunade egged the boy on and the boy raised an eyebrow at this. "Give me a break, lady. What could someone like you put on the table for a bet? Rasengan said you were flat broke. Ah, but it so happens I have this necklace for a bet." Tsunade emphasized her point and pointed to the green necklace that she wore. "Meh, what's a necklace worth anyway? I don't see the point." "Naruto, that necklace belonged to the Shodime Hokage, Tsunade's grandfather. That thing alone could probably buy 5 mountains worth of land." Jiraiya pointed that out, earning a surprised look from the blonde and then turning back his gaze to the necklace. "The money certainly is a good prospect, but the memorabilia alone of the Shodime Hokage. Hell, that's even more awesome. You're on, lady. Make sure you have that necklace ready by the time I'm done. The will of the future Hokage will not be defeated." This was Naruto's vow. This vow that he made to Tsunade will be one that he intends to keep, like all of the promises he had made. Just like all those times when people have doubted him, he will show her just how wrong she was on her assessment of him. He will win this stupid bet. Chapter 8. Legacy Awakened. The legend of the Three Wolves Fanged Ma Cavern was perhaps a testament to the great literary boom of the samurai culture in ancient times. It is widely believed that the legend comes from the tales of samurai and their families that were crossing of what is now known as Iron Country. These samurai often had to fend off night predators of the snowy country during the night. It is said in legend that a great wolf with 3 heads, who held control above all heavens, made it snow in the country constantly and so harsh, that no creature could ever live in the lands of pure white snow. The wolf in legend, contained within its possession, was an orb that made its power so. Legend states that Susanoo wo Makoto, the god of storms, dared to cross the land with nothing but his divine sword, Aim no Murakumo, and the clothes on his back in order to obtain the orb, as a gift in appeasing his sister, Amaterasu Omikami. Braving the cold winds, Susanoo had finally reached the monster at the very center of the country itself, sitting upon a black obelisk-like stone, and under its paw was the said orb. It glowed ethereally in the colors of the aurora borealis, shining, shimmering and surrounded by sharp claws that didn't seem to scratch the almost fragile-looking object. But it did not seem willing to fight at all, instead it looked severely weakened. The wolf had mentioned it was drunk on the power of the orb, and with it the wolf had covered the entire country in snow and killing all the animals in it, starving him. Susanoo, with pity, slew the wolf with his sword and grabbed the orb from the monster's claws and swore to himself that he would store this treasure in a matsu, never letting anyone touch the orb. It is said that the aurora borealis in the skies of Iron Country represented the power of the orb leaking from its storage in the sacred treasury, or that it was the way that led to the Great Hall of Amatsu. Folk tales in Iron Country have long since held a religious system much different from the legend of the Rakuto Sennin. But its first tales written in ancient texts suggest that the author of the book had. Kiba had yawned at the page as he stretched and put the book down. Today, he was off duty and he had nothing better to do. He could go train, but he didn't know what else to work on without a new jutsu he had in mind. So he decided to hang out with his teammates on this particular day off. What a mistake that turned out to be. Shino's idea of fun, when it's not collecting bugs, was reading a book. Who has fun reading a damn book? He sighed loudly, earning a stern look from Shino, while his female teammate Hinata didn't seem to care. He looked at the title of Hinata's book and squinted. The 5 countries. The powers that came to be throughout the continent after the warring clans era. Kiba relented. If it was one thing he hated the most, it was historical accounts in paper form. He could not remember a time when he had finished an entire chapter of a history book that he didn't sleep through after the 3rd page. Sometimes he wondered if his teammates were rocks in disguise, they didn't know how to have fun. Man, this is boring, he finally voiced out as he closed the book in his hands and stared outside the window. I bet Naruto is having all sorts of action right now in his mission. You let me decide on as to what we do in our free time other than training, why? Because each of us have little to perfect other than our own family styles at the moment, many of our clansmen are still out there with the repairs and doing the extra missions while we genin have to sit back and help with the maintenance. It is surprising that the Junin commander has given us a break. Shino clarified as he turned the page. Arachnia. The natural enemy of family insectity. Hiba cringed from Shino's book. And I think I just found something that I hate more than history books. It was then that Team 10 had arrived in the library. They looked a little tired but not by much from what Kiba could tell. What's with you guys? Don't tell me reading is one of your hobbies too. Kiba asked with a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Ino seemed to scoff at her former classmate. Speak for yourself, mud boy. I happen to appreciate a good book from time to time. Ino said as she went to the bookshelves while Choji followed suit and Shikamaru sitting at the nearest table and laid his head on his arms to sleep. Well, it's good to know one of us has some sense of normalcy right now. Oh, so one of your interests is the samurai culture, huh? Choji peered to his side as he noticed Kiba's book while the boy scoffed. Not really. I thought it was interesting at first, but then it went on from myths and then made those debunking statements. I really hate that. Kiba almost shouted. Shikamaru groaned and replied lazily. Kiba, we're in the library, the few places where loud doesn't mix within Konoha. I would appreciate it if you keep your opinions to yourself here. I'm trying to sleep. If that's your problem, why don't you try reading anything in the fiction area? Ino asked as she pointed to the shelves where the sign, fiction, was posted. Kiba was gone immediately followed as Akamaru waved at them and went to the fiction area. Daigoro. Loyal friend of Yojimbo. Kiba paused at the title and grabbed the book from the shelf. He looked at the cover of the book and was mildly interested when he noticed a samurai, clad in tattered robes and a straw hat with 2 swords on one side while his dog carried 4 more. Kiba looked at Akamaru at the top of his head and asked with a smile, "Want to give this a shot, boy?" The dog complied with a small bark and Kiba said, "That's a yes then. Today, you will witness the life of a seamless man, alive in an age of endless war and carried over 1,000 sins. He draws his blade for those who will pay the right price. He had slain for money, but in a time where his sword is not needed, he realizes his actions with remorse and atones for his actions by being a wandering samurai. But he is not alone, for at his side was his most loyal friend, his most trusted companion, Daigoro. With Daigoro, the repentant warrior would create once more another legacy." Kiba smiled. This was something he could definitely get behind in Tanzaku City. Naruto was out into the woods again to train. This time, he had begun to use clones to learn the final stage of the Rasengan and learn it by one hand. He was having a ridiculously difficult time at it too. The shape would destabilize when he tried compressing the chakra in a thin shell layer. It was freaking frustrating as he had made little progress since training with shadow clones. Try as he might, performing the Rasengan with one hand would make even a seasoned Junin nuts about the difficulty curve in chakra control. Naruto gritted his teeth and sat down under a shade of a tree beside its tree trunk. He looked up, the sun's light muffled by the leaves that blocked most of it. He sighed. It was getting dark in the first day, he had yet to dispel any of his clones and he was tired as hell. What the hell was he doing wrong? Naruto had never been back at the hotel for almost 24 hours. Jiraiya had not come to pick him up. The boy scoffed, the man was probably still trying to convince Tsunade. Naruto wouldn't even accept someone like Tsunade as Hokage. May I ask a little bit of your time, Naruto-kun? The boy was thrown out of his thoughts when he saw Tsunade's attendant, Shizune, along with her pet pig as she looked at the boy with a concerned look. Shizune-chan? Naruto asked, curious as to what this woman wanted from her. I know I may be a bit intruding, but please, try to understand Tsunade-sama. She bowed. She knew she was going to very personal levels of Tsunade's behavior if this kept up. She was not always like this. She had lost many people that she loved because of that necklace. Tsunade and Jiraiya. Becoming Hokage is my dream after all. Everything was quiet around her. Those were the only words she was hearing right now, those painful memories of her little brother and her lover. They echoed in her head, so much that it hurt just even hearing them. She gritted her teeth, taking another swig of the strong alcohol in her hands. Odin and a bottle of sake, old man, a voice called out. She looked at her side and saw Jiraiya sitting down beside her. You brought that kid with you on purpose, didn't you? Tsunade asked as bitterness rang in her voice. She had questioned him again about the boy. Jiraiya merely shrugged and grabbed his dish and bottle. You won't even try to deny it? She asked and Jiraiya smirked at that. If I did, I'd be lying. A spy master knows when he needs to lie and when he doesn't. Jiraiya mentioned as he took a sip of his sake. What an underhanded trick, Jiraiya. That kid reminded me a lot about Naoki. You know damn well when to push my buttons. She said as the mere mention of her brother's name caused her to take another long swig of the alcohol. She had never gotten over the boy's death. Still can't accept it, huh? After many years since then, you still carry that sadness with you. Jiraiya mused. How in the world am I supposed to get over it, Jiraiya? How can I just accept their deaths just like that? Jiraiya had heard enough. 4 students, Tsunade, I had 4 students who died. Do you know how worse that is for me, to have your students that you consider to be your children, die before you do? 3 of them I couldn't even bury. There were no last words, no time for me to see their bodies except for one. How does that make me feel? Jiraiya asked as he turned his back and looked up at the night sky outside. There isn't a day that I regret about them and I'll carry over this regret until I die. But until then, I refuse to let that sadness take over me for the rest of my life. Because I still have to do what needs to be done. She hadn't noticed it before, but now killing intent was oozing bit by bit from Jiraiya. So you try to do anything against Konoha, and I'll personally see to it that I deal with you, do you understand, Tsunade? The look he had given her was a testament to Jiraiya's loyalty to his village. Tsunade didn't seem fazed by it though. As a member of the Sannin, she was quite capable of standing on even ground with Jiraiya. But a thought had come to her mind though. Her teammate showed loyalty to his village more so than loyalty to his team. The years had certainly changed a lot of people and Jiraiya was not immune to it. She dropped her head a little and looked at the glass of alcohol she had in her hands. Naoki, Dan, what would you have done? She knew she would get no answer. All she could hear was the sound of the wind flowing behind her. There was nothing that she could ever gain. Her memories were once more filled with the memories of Dan and Naoki, their lives before they were taken away from her, how fate dealt a severe hand against them, against her. 2 days from now, she would have her answer. When she came back to the apartment, Shizune was looking at her intently. It was 2 in the morning, Tsunade noted. She had been spending time getting drunk throughout the night. There was no sign of Naruto in the hotel but Jiraiya was sound asleep in his room. She paid the boy no heed until Shizune spoke to her. Tsunade-sama, please do not continue with this bet. That boy, he's willing to prove you wrong and get that necklace. I tried to deter him from doing so, but he refuses to back down from his word. He would even harm himself just to prove his point. Tsunade gritted her teeth. That boy, acting all brave and not thinking of the consequences just like Nawa, she paused. She had almost said his younger brother's name. Somehow, that upset her more. Get that boy here immediately, Shizune, so that we can stop his stupidity for at least one day. Shizune had agreed and had left Taunton behind who had scurried over to Tsunade while the woman asked. That boy is a lot to handle, huh? Naoki acted like that too, she said as she sat down, her hand placed on her forehead in deep thought as she gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. Why can't I just stop comparing him to my little brother? When Shizune had arrived, she had brought Naruto over, unconscious and showing signs of chakra exhaustion. His hands had chakra burns laden on them, evident of his own disciplining himself in training trying to master the Yondaime Hokage's jutsu. Tsunade's hands touched the young boy's hands and it glowed in an incandescent green. Shizune had watched her master at work as she slowly mended the boy's wounds. There was no blood, only scrapes and burn marks. She had stopped the inflammation of the boy's chakra coils by suppressing any more inflammatory cells, effectively numbing Naruto's hands from the pain. Shizune, no matter how many times she had seen Tsunade's work, remained astounded of her master's ability to heal injuries. It had been a long time since she showed her skills, but seeing it now at work once more, she couldn't help but compare Tsunade's work to an elite artisan. This was a testament to Tsunade's skill as a medic nin. Tsunade then stood up as she let go of the boy's hands but didn't walk away for a few seconds. She watched the boy asleep for a few minutes without a word before she informed Shizune that she was going to bed. Throughout her sleep, she recalled dreams of her lover Dan, but her little brother's memories seemed to become more prominent. When Naruto woke up, he felt his arms were okay. His fatigue was gone and his sleep had fully restored him. Which was puzzling, because he had remembered exhausting himself to the brink of his arms were aching and burning in pain due to the constant practice of performing a one-handed Rasengan. When he had ran out of juice, his clones suddenly popped and their memories invaded his mind in a rush that he eventually blacked out. He looked at his right hand and flexed every finger in it and found it to be completely okay. He smiled, and went outside. His work was far from finished, but he knew progress when he saw one. When he had reached his personal training area outside the walls of the city, Naruto surveyed the entire area before nodding. Just before he was about to perform the Kage Bunshin once more to hasten his training, he knew he should practice first on his own. Doing it like Arrow Sennin won't cut me right now, I have too much chakra to exert control with just one hand. Naruto thought as he then tried a new approach. He placed his hands together in his front. His fingers were touching each other, tip to tip while his palms remained open. He extended his arm outwards and then began molding chakra into the empty void in the middle of his hands. It was then that Naruto began pushing chakra to his hands and began a spiraling pattern as chakra began to take shape. He could hear the sound of grinding as chakra rotated in his hands. The spinning was getting harder, harsher and more turbulent. The dust in his feet began to disperse as the grass danced from the force being displayed. It was then that Naruto applied the shell of thin chakra around the orb to contain the force of his chakra within. The wind slowly died and the turbulence controlled. For a few seconds, all seemed normal and even Naruto felt a sense of control. But the shell of the technique completely shattered from the sheer force as Naruto was sent flying from his place and onto cold hard ground a good 10 feet from where he stood. He grinned and stood up from his spot. He had made a form of progress. He dusted himself off and then performed middle index cross seal. Now or never, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto shouted as hundreds of clones appeared all around him, all wearing that grin that the original had. It would take Naruto a few more dedicated hours before he pass out again, Shizune finding once more unconscious and dragging him back to the hotel. Like the previous night, Jiraiya would arrive earlier while his teammate would arrive into the early hours past midnight with the stench of alcohol lingering with her. This time, Tsunade didn't heal him when she arrived, undoubtedly drunk once more. The next day, Jiraiya awoke with a sense of grogginess. He could feel his body being heavy and he was having a difficult time standing up. Why would I be? Tsunade. Jiraiya tried to stand but found himself leaning on the wall as Shizune came barging into his room. Tsunade-sama. What's the matter? Jiraiya asked. His voice was raspy but he was slowly gaining his sense of balance. She's been missing throughout the day. I think she's going to confront Orochimaru on her own. Shizune shouted, earning a grunt from Jiraiya before he answered. Damn that Tsunade. She drugged me last night and I never even noticed. It was then that Naruto had woken up and gave the two a quizzical look. What's going on? Jiraiya went outside as he said, no time. Grab your gear and prepare for a fight. We're going to where Tsunade is right now. Naruto suddenly felt the grogginess of the morning escape him as he felt the rush of adrenaline when he had grabbed his stuff from his bag, outfitted himself with his gear. He jumped right after Jiraiya and Shizune, who were all being led by the woman's pet pig. Whatever is going to happen, Naruto knew that he had to prepare himself for the worst. Outside Tanzaku City. Well, Tsunade, have you thought about my proposal yet? Orochimaru asked to her, smirking at the woman as she stood in front of him. Behind him was Kabuto, remaining silent and adjusting his glasses. That man was looking for any signs of betrayal just in case. Orochimaru looked back at Tsunade, who gave a silent nod as she approached Orochimaru. The snake Sannin smiled. Who knew his teammate was this easy to coax? The trivial emotions she displayed was easy to play with and manipulate. A mention of her loved ones who died tragically was all the push he needed to persuade her teammate. He made no further reasons to hide his intentions when he had his arms healed. He had said before to Tsunade in a clear manner, he was going to destroy Konoha once his arms were healed. The woman's right hand glowed in a gentle green as she slowly approached Orochimaru's hands. Finally, this suffering ends and I can continue what I have been planning all these years. His thoughts raced at the intoxicating prospect that he was going to able to use jutsu again. The thought was exciting, relieving even, to this immense pain that he was experiencing. But as his taste of sweet victory drew near, his thoughts of power were abruptly ended when a kunai flew in between them, forcing Orochimaru to jump back and look down angrily. To think that you would do this to me, of all people. His face became murderous and turned to his former teammate. What is the meaning of this, Tsunade? His assistant, Kabuto, spoke first. That technique she was about to perform was a cell disintegration technique. She was going to obliterate your arms by overloading all of cells with volatile chakra, Orochimaru-sama. You dare ask me that question after playing me for a fool, Orochimaru? She asked, her voice turning to venom. You play with my emotions and you continue to belittle me, even though I am also part of the Sannin. You will pay for your arrogance, you filthy snake. She was about to charge when Orochimaru shook his head and replied. A shame then. Too bad, Tsunade. I really was planning to bring Naoki and Dan back to life. He chuckled as Tsunade's temper flared. You don't ever mention their names to me, Orochimaru. She then charged at her teammate. Kabuto intervened and stepped forward, to face off Orochimaru's opponent. It's a shame that you have turned out like this, Tsunade-sama. You could have been a valuable ally and I wouldn't have to resort to this. Kabuto pulled out a kunai and rather violently lacerated his hand with it. Blood spewed forth and Tsunade suddenly stopped in her tracks. The image of Dan and Naoki's blood began bombing her head as her eyes went wide. A shame too, that a medic of your caliber has become hematophobic. You are far too easily dealt with because of your crippling weakness. Kabuto lashed his blood-laden hand at Tsunade, who was painted by the man's blood. Tsunade stepped back as Kabuto had arrived at her front and kicked her in the gut, forcing Tsunade to skid back for a few meters. Kabuto smirked. The glasses on his eyes was covered by the sun's light as he approached Tsunade. The utter sadistic glee that he was having was showing, and Tsunade was falling victim to his methods. As he was about to charge again at the woman, 3 shuriken had intercepted his charge as 3 ninja and a pig jumped down in front of Tsunade and guarded her. Sorry for being late, because apparently, somebody thought it was a good idea to get someone drugged. Jiraiya had said, hearing nothing from her voice. He turned back towards his enemies and scowled. Orochimaru, I will definitely stop you here. Jiraiya thought as he cringed and stumbled forward. Damn drug is still in effect. Jiraiya commented. Orochimaru gave a small chuck. I see the idiot still falls for the oldest tricks in the book. I cannot believe how a blunder like you could even hope to stand against me, let alone Tsunade. Well, I guess this has more to do with the teachings of Sarutobi-sensei than to your output. Jiraiya growled at his teammates, jeering. That man never did have any sense of tact in him. Jiraiya had wished that he had gave Orochimaru a sound beating when they were younger. Maybe it could have changed how Orochimaru would be today. But sadly, it was not to be. Orochimaru was a bastard whose heart was worse than his pasty-faced smug. The 2 elderly men were not moving from their respective positions as they were silently watching each other, anticipating any form of attack coming from one another. Meanwhile, Naruto was staring worriedly at Kabuto. The only word escaped his lips was the man's name. Kabuto, he said to no one in particular. The man turned to look at him and grinned. It seems you are not hopeless at all, Naruto-kun. You actually ranked up. I'm surprised that you were even considered. Naruto knew then and there that this bastard was mocking him and the village. Looking up at the man's headband and then back to him, Naruto's frown turned to a scowl. I misjudged you, Kabuto. To think that I actually had to trust you during the Chunin exam. Naruto's fists clenched and aimed his right hand at Kabuto. I should have just given you a beating back then. That would have been more satisfying for me. It was too good to be true. My, how less naive you have grown since our last meeting. But you know your growth won't be comparable to that of Sasuke-kun. Kabuto said those words with a hint of amusement in them. Naruto didn't look like he was too pleased with that. If your aim is to piss me off, then you're doing a damn good job. Right now I just want to beat you up within an inch of your life. When Naruto began to go into a basic stance and clasped his hands together for a handseal, Kabuto's amused smile grew and raised an eyebrow at the boy. I admit that you caught everyone by surprise, Naruto-kun. Your display of talent surpasses that of talented members from prominent clans. I must say I was quite impressed, but do remember this. In Orochimaru-sama's eyes, you are nothing but a hindrance. Compared to Sasuke-kun, you are nothing. A guy who can't even make his own opinions doesn't deserve to look down on other people. You're just some lackey, Kabuto. You're nothing. This seemed to have an intended effect. Kabuto scowled at the boy. You little brat. You don't know what you just got into. Kabuto, Orochimaru interrupted. The silver-haired medic looked to his master and nodded. He dabbed his left index and middle fingers to his bleeding right palm and began performing the sequence of the Kuchio's no Jutsu. In response, Jiraiya bit his thumb and began performing the seals of his Kuchio's no Jutsu as well. Kuchio's no Jutsu, summoning technique. Smoke covered the area on two different areas of the land. Two giant snakes appeared beneath Kabuto and Orochimaru while Jiraiya stood over a comparatively smaller toad roughly standing just 20 feet tall. Orochimaru smirked as Jiraiya gritted his teeth. A fool shall always remain a fool after all. It was then that the gigantic twin snakes attacked. Thankfully, Jiraiya's toad was agile enough and could jump adequately enough to avoid being struck. As the toad took flight and danced in the air as the snakes narrowly struck it down, Jiraiya was already in the midst of performing another technique. Doden. Yomi Numa, Earth Release. Underworld Swamp, the ground beneath the twin serpents suddenly softened and already, half of its body was absorbed into the quicksand like mud. Kabuto, take care of the rest. Jiraiya is mine. Orochimaru commanded his subordinate who agreed and jumped from beside the snake Sannin and headed straight towards his target, a vulnerable Tsunade. Stand back, Naruto-kun. Shizune pulled the blonde back with her left hand and in quick motion, reeled her sleeve back revealing a set of 5 Senbon launchers that was seemingly laced with poison. Kabuto counted 5 and in a matter of less than a second, he reacted accordingly when Shizune pulled the strings back and fired her weapons. He drew a kunai from his pouch and deflected 3 of them while 2 passed by over his head when he ducked. His hand glowed in blue in what Shizune would recognize as a chakra scalpel. Shizune reacted quickly and engaged Kabuto in hand-to-hand, with her own chakra scalpel. Chakra scalpels are like invisible blades depending on what the user wants to cut. It could go deep within the body to sever arteries or organs fast. If he has knowledge of this jutsu and he engages in combat, then he might be a medic that can go on the offensive without much of a problem. Shizune thought. A standing rule for medics was that they were the last people to engage in combat. For Kabuto to charge in with an active medical jutsu, the man probably does have skill for his confidence to charge into battle. Kabuto gave a horizontal swipe at Shizune's midsection who parried the blow with her own chakra scalpel. The two jutsu clashed and repelled each other and recoiled both of their hands. Shizune, quick to grab the momentum, turned around and crouched as she faced Kabuto and thrusts her left hand forward. Kabuto decided to go for a dodge and Shizune narrowly hit her target's abdomen. With skill that she thought unheard of, Kabuto had managed to enter her guard with a devilish smirk on his face and kicked Shizune on her midsection, sending her flying away but not before Shizune could counter with a jutsu she knew would be good enough for offense. Ninpo. Dokugiri, ninja art. Poisoned mist. Alarmed that this ninja knew that particular technique, Kabuto's eyes grew wide and his pupils turned to pinpricks as he was soon engulfed by the poisoned cloud. Even a small whiff of this cloud will kill me. When the poison mist cleared, Kabuto was nowhere in sight. Shizune stood on alert for that moment until her legs were suddenly sensing pain as if 1,000 needles had pierced her legs' ankles over and over. He struck the tendons on my ankles. Shizune said as she grunted in pain and lost her balance. Kabuto was about to finish her off when 3 clones of Naruto had managed to intercept him before he could do so. All of them looked absolutely angry at Kabuto at that point. Kabuto had jumped back, expecting the clones to charge at him, but Naruto didn't. He was taking a pure defensive stance. It was wise of you to not engage me head-on, Naruto-kun, you are getting better at your judgment. The boy didn't say a word but Kabuto grinned. But even with that growing mind of yours, you will never be able to catch up to Sasuke-kun. Kabuto adjusted his glasses and his wicked grin grew wider when the 3 clones scowled at Kabuto. Go fuck yourself, Kabuto. And I'm not letting you touch Shizune-san or the old lady behind me. You want them? Then you're going to have to fight me. Your bravado has no place in the shinobi world, Naruto-kun. Calmly, Kabuto walked towards the blonde and his one hand glowed with blue chakra once more. 3 Narutos charged at him, intent on taking the man down. Kabuto remained unfazed. As the clones encircled Kabuto, one of them went in for the kill and aimed a stab at Kabuto's abdomen. Kabuto grinned as he merely took a step back and sidestepped the clone. The hand that held the kunai went past him and Kabuto immediately struck the clone with a downward swipe, blue chakra arching magnificently as he did so. But not before turning around to his back and swinging horizontally to a crouch as he swiped a clone going in for his back to its neck. The clone was immediately dispelled as the one up front was directly struck to the face with palm thrust, effectively dispelling it. Now surrounded with smoke, Kabuto already thought of his next step. Naruto was a clever boy, after all. But a boy nonetheless, and one still so unskilled in the nature of tactics and strategy, so with that in mind, Kabuto performed another earth jutsu and the earth below him swallowed him up. Quite on time too, as a hail of kunai and shuriken came from all sides through the smokescreen that managed to pierce the ground with Kabuto safe from Naruto's volley of attacks. Still unsure of the man's status, Naruto was still on guard and was almost taken by surprise when he heard the ground shatter at his feet. Kabuto had gotten too close for comfort as the boy jumped backwards with the traitor almost having him captured. Your skill is indeed a sight to behold. It's like watching a well-choreographed play. Where one misses, the other does its job to do the damage or cover him, or could be the real attack next to a feint. But you still lack in a lot of areas. Your taijutsu may not be as subpar anymore, but it is nothing to be admired either. Your speed is lacking. Sasuke-kun was faster even before the Chunin exam finals. The only thing that you are good at as of now is endurance and skill, which is comparatively nothing. Your jutsu repertoire isn't even up to standards, with your strongest being a wind jutsu that requires a prerequisite that is beyond practical. You're just a rookie who is still wet behind the ears. Naruto inwardly smirked and replied to the silver-haired man, just goes to show that you don't know what you're talking about, snake fondler. With that, Naruto performed the shadow clone technique once more and was soon surrounded with smoke. Kabuto merely scowled and grabbed a kunai from his pouch, having it in a reverse grip. Soon the smoke cleared and out came 20 clones from the billowing smoke. A second later, they came charging at him like a stampede of mad oxen. But just before they came close to the silver-haired medic, the clones split in groups as one had jumped from thick layer of clones and headed straight for Kabuto with a punch. Instead of evading this time, Kabuto attacked head-on with a swipe of his knife. The knife was about to end the clone's life when 4 clones had jumped in just in time to interrupt Kabuto, but the silver-haired medic already knew of this. He grabbed his first assailant at the boy's punching arm and swung him wildly around, hitting the remaining 4 closed around him, with Kabuto sticking the kunai to the clone's face, dispelling him as well. Without missing a beat, Kabuto didn't stay from his spot for too long, as he might get ambushed sooner than later, and used this time to try and break through Naruto's encircling maneuver. As Naruto tried to, and failing to keep Kabuto contained, Shizune watched in strange wonder as the newly minted Chunin tried to keep Kabuto from going anywhere, but slowly failing. Naruto-kun's maneuvers are very good. He puts his enemies in positions that become more disadvantageous as time goes on, making it somewhere that Naruto-kun is quite possibly good at, a battle of attrition. Naruto-kun knows his positions well and keeps Kabuto on his toes, but ultimately, Kabuto has better skill, better and more fluid taijutsu, and can counter just about any movement that Naruto-kun's clones cannot hope to overwhelm that easily. Shizune was still down, and she knew that Naruto was only trying to stall Kabuto down before she could get back. Her leg tendons were already reattaching as she healed her ankles, flexing and extending her muscles there. She was about to take charge when she noticed that another batch of clones were dispelled this time. It was thanks to Kabuto's chakra scalpels. Behind the medic was a small stream of blue light arching sideways as 5 clones were dispelled simultaneously while Kabuto smirked. You're quite the slippery target, Naruto-kun. I thought I almost had you at the time. But you are still far outclassed. Your stupid dreams of becoming Hokage. Forget about it, you'll die sooner with those dreams unfulfilled. Kabuto then performed several hand signs and placed both his palms on the ground. 2 seal arrays began to spread as Kabuto gave a wicked smile. I guess I just have to wipe out the entire platoon in order to take you down. Ninpo. Shakan no Jutsu, ninja art. Dead soul technique. 2 ninjas then appeared from the earth below, wearing white masks, limp and hanging out front. Their uniform clearly told Naruto that they were Anbu. They grabbed their swords and the pair began charging at the remaining clones with disturbing speed and widely slashed about with their swords. 2 clones were immediately dispatched as the smoke cleared. The 2 dead shinobi jumped from their position and let loose a hail of shuriken and kunai, forcing the clones to scatter about. With their wide, sloppy and sweeping movements, most of Naruto's clones were wiped out by the two tall ninja with their swords. Now with just one more clone, Naruto had ordered the remaining doppelganger to take another position. The clone did and performed a timely Shunshin no jutsu just as a sword was about to decapitate it, hitting nothing but smoke and air. Naruto had managed to duck just in time only to see a sword about to pierce his face. Wide-eyed, he felt time had managed to slow down for a moment just as the sword went straight in between his eyes and piercing his flesh. Naruto-kun! Shizune shouted, getting the attention of the three Sannin who saw the boy being stabbed in between the eyes and a sword protruding on the top of his head. Jiraiya looked on in shock, Tsunade in fear while Orochimaru in wicked glee. But the body did not turn out to be as it was soon covered in smoke and a familiar hissing sound was heard from inside it. Boom. The two bodies were obliterated and turned to nothing more than pounds of meat and giblets in the air as they landed on the ground in an unceremonious thud. Kabuto was quick to put up his guard from that sudden stunt. The boy had managed to perform another kawarimi substitution without virtually anyone's notice that even he was fooled. It was then that he noticed that he heard something at his back. Turning around, he saw Naruto charging at him, already closing the gap by an inch with an orb of spiraling chakra in his hand, viciously grinding as the boy held it in all its power. Then, Kabuto heard a rustle in the wind and a whistle. He turned to the opposite side and saw another Naruto charging at him, with the wind spinning madly in his right forearm, his forehead only slightly bleeding. Kabuto had soon realized that he was suddenly trapped like a cornered rat. He had no time to perform a kawarimi or sink into the ground, and his meat shields were now piles of bloodless and decomposing flesh on the ground. He could not block, he would be foolish to do so. So his last viable option was to evade ever so slightly that the techniques would miss. With a little off balance, Kabuto smirked until he had realized what he had done. So caught up with his own survival, he had failed to take into account that Naruto had ways to make him such a dangerous opponent, and Kabuto was now witnessing it firsthand. He had forgotten one small detail that Naruto knew and would most likely exploit. Tenrin had the power to absorb and reverse the powered spin of any technique against the opponent. In this case, the spiraling orb that the blonde contained definitely counted as a power source for his technique. "Before I become Hokage, I definitely won't die," were Naruto's last words as he could feel the power of a contained storm encircled him and the winds howled in awesome fury. Kabuto was literally blown away from the impact as the ground beneath the blonde shattered from the sheer amount of power that the boy displayed, and at the very epicenter of this attack was Naruto, absorbing every bit of the Rasengan's tempestuous strength. End game. Kabuto. Orochimaru had a surprised look on his face. To him, this was lightning in a bottle for Konoha. A boy that would prove much too dangerous for his plans, he thought. Jiraiya took the opportunity to perform a jutsu and inhaled. Kaden. Karyu Enden, fire release. Fire dragon napalm bomb. A huge surge of searing flames excited Jiraiya's mouth on top of a gigantic toad as Jiraiya burned all the snakes alive from his jutsu. In surprise, Orochimaru jumped back and scowled. Back to Naruto. The winds gave a furious howl as Naruto stood on the middle. The clone dispelling from the sheer force of the wind that had pushed him away as dust and debris flew about as he came out of his previous location. Kabuto scowled. He had never thought that the boy had just covered that one glaring weakness of his jutsu. Naruto, however, was the one now that was giving that menacing smirk against him. Kaisei Gyukuden, reverse situation, bastard. With those words, Naruto vanished from his position and reappeared just beside Kabuto, and he was already in midkick. A sickle of wind escaped from the blonde's motion as Kabuto had jumped back and raised his lower torso and feet. The high-pressured wind jutsu sailed below him fast, but Naruto was already on work with multiple kunai and shuriken flying towards Kabuto at a fast pace. Naruto wasn't satisfied with the speed of his projectiles and decided to add more push to them. With a punch, a vacuum of wind escaped from his arm and pushed the shuriken towards his enemy faster. Kabuto shielded himself as the wind went by him, at first cutting his cheek as the hail of knives and shuriken suddenly pierced his flesh while some passed by behind him. By now, Naruto had vanished at Kabuto's front and had jumped just several inches away from Kabuto. His hand grabbed a kunai from midair and slashed at the medic, crucial enough to cause a decent amount of blood loss from the medic's back from the shoulder blades to the just above the lumbar spine, and Naruto landed on his feet and held out two hands together in a clawing gesture at his front, touching finger to finger and began gathering chakra to them. He then began spinning it around and the chakra began to take shape. Naruto then began to contain it in the orb on his palm. The chakra glowed blue, incandescent but stood majestically as Naruto charged at Kabuto with the full intent of eradicating the silver-haired medic. Die. The blonde's expression showed something that Kabuto thought, perhaps was worse than Sasuke. Naruto had primal emotions and probably due to the fox, the boy's emotional capacities were being manipulated to a certain degree. This wasn't anger. This wasn't rage. No, all of those extreme forms of wrath were nothing compared to this. This was true, blood-curdling malice. Rasengan, spiraling sphere. Naruto's darkening expressions finally reared its ugly head when the blonde shoved the Rasengan onto Kabuto's stomach. But Kabuto ultimately laid in one more blow before he was blasted with the Yondaime Hokage's technique and sent crashing to a boulder behind him while the ground became entrenched from the sheer force of the technique. Kabuto had managed to hit Naruto straight on the chest and mangled the boy's myocardial muscles. Naruto was suddenly stopped by the sudden aching of his chest and then nothing. He coughed out blood just before he fell down with a sense of victory. It was a slow, horrifyingly painful watch as Tsunade and Shizune saw Naruto fall down on the ground, blood flowing from his mouth and forehead before hitting the earth beneath him with his back. I win, you see that, Granny. Naruto let out one final sentence before his vision was consumed by the darkness. That tenacity, Naruto-kun, you're truly a shinobi that should be destined for greatness. Shizune was about to come to aid the boy when she heard the sound of Jiraiya's voice shouting vehemently. It was then that she noticed Orochimaru lunging in midair as he headed straight towards the boy, the sword of Kusanagi sprouted from his mouth. Just as he was close to the blonde, a figure had appeared just in time. Her right fists were glowing with powerful chakra and sent it straight to the Sannin's face. The result was an earth-shattering, teeth-clenching blow as Orochimaru was hit on his left arm and promptly sent tumbling back by at least several hundred meters. Shizune stood in awe as Tsunade stood there, fists still glowing. Her facade of fear was gone and in place was one of pure concentration. She looked down to the bow and with a simple flick of her heel, she tapped the earth beneath her feet and shouted the name of her technique. Doden. Go Doroku Geishi, Earth Release. 5 Earth Wall Land Flips. Soon, 5 slabs of earth erected all around her and the boy as she said shouted to Jiraiya. Jiraiya, keep Orochimaru occupied for a while. I'm tending to the boy. This is an order, from your Godime Hokage. Nawaki, Dan, my memories of you has saddened me far too long. But this boy, he has reminded me of the times when you two were still alive. I'll forever cherish your memories, but this boy, who carries your will and desire, I will save him for all our sakes. With that, Tsunade's hands turned green, finally activating her healing chakra as she tended to the boy that stood up to a Chunin. Tsunade, I find you saving that boy truly illogical. You have forsaken your chances of being with your lover and your younger brother for the sake of being part of a washed-up village that serves no other purpose but cause grief. Orochimaru commented as he got up. Jiraiya stood between him and the earthen wall erected from the toad hermit's back. You have no idea what you're on about, Orochimaru. For the sake of the village, that boy was putting everything on the line, just like what Nawaki and Dan would have willingly done. What you don't get is the bonds that people share, something that you have thrown away for the sake of power. That boy that just beat your attendant. He'll go places and he'll be even better than your precious Uchiha. That kid has guts, Orochimaru. Something like you couldn't possibly ever have. Jiraiya mentioned in a smirk, with the effects of the drug minimizing, he was slowly gaining his strength back. That boy will only be a burden, Jiraiya. You know the types of people that will go after him. It is better he dies now or both our plans will be in jeopardy. Orochimaru replied with a scowl. The toad hermit smirked, I'm not even going to consider it. Besides, him being a dangerous threat to you in the future satisfies my childish ego. With that, Jiraiya began performing a series of seals and his hair sharpened. Ninpo. Hari Jizu, Ninja Art. Hair Needle Guardians. With Naruto's mindscape, Kurama looked around and saw the constructs of Naruto's mind around him slowly disappeared from the encroaching darkness. This place is getting dark, so dark. The boy was dying, Kurama deduced. The encroaching darkness coincided with the boy's weakening life force. He had surmised that the boy had a debilitating injury that would be difficult to heal even with his chakra. His regeneration could only do so much in this current state due to the seal. Not that he would be willing to spare chakra for this runt, no. If this was the limit and the peak of the boy's powers, then this was as far as he was going to go. Biju like him would reform after a few years. It wouldn't be much an inconvenience for him anyway. This is as far as you go, brat. When the darkness had crept into the cage of the seal, Kurama noticed it got slower and slower until it eventually stopped, never even reaching past a third of its steel bars. The darkness soon receded back into the floors, into the pipes, and began disappearing as far as he could see. It would seem luck still has more to play for you, brat. You are fortunate. Back in the physical world, Tsunade was vigorously healing the boy with all her willpower. Her renewed spirit would simply not let this boy, who carried the same dreams for the future as his brother and lover, die so easily. So when his breathing stabilized, she was relieved fully, and in one more act of pure cheekiness from Naruto, he reached out his right hand and grabbed hold of the necklace on her neck. Guess, I win the bet, Granny. He said with a smirk. It was weak but strong at the same time, and Tsunade, for the first time in more than a decade, cried with tears of joy. Yeah, you did, brat. And I've never been so glad at losing before. Tsunade held the boy's hand with both of hers and removed the necklace around her neck. All of her hopes and dreams were now riding with this relatively unknown kid that had a larger-than-life attitude, and the one that gave her hope. It's yours now. With that, the jutsu around her dispelled and the earthen walls collapsed around them. She turned her back on the boy that was now resting peacefully behind her, and her expression turned fierce. In front of her stood Jiraiya, his jutsu still activated as he repelled Orochimaru quite well enough. The effect of her drug had expectantly run out, and Jiraiya was holding off Orochimaru. So glad that you could finally join us, Haim. Jiraiya said with a smirk, and Tsunade took a step forward. Shut up. Orochimaru is mine. She said those words with clear intent of taking out their former teammate. HMPH. Loyalty to a village that has done absolutely nothing for you. What absolute lunacies that you two still delude yourselves into. Orochimaru commented while Jiraiya spoke. Bite me, Orochimaru. What we're doing today isn't just for Konoha. This is for Sarutobi-sensei. This is for all the people that you've killed and caused harm in the village. Jiraiya replied and gave the snake Sanin the middle finger. Orochimaru, I'm putting an end to all your schemes right here and now. Tsunade finally roared as she bit down on her right thumb. Jiraiya was quick to do the same as he began performing the sequence of seals. Kabuto. Orochimaru shouted, and within seconds, Kabuto had appeared beside Orochimaru, now fully healed. Storing your healing chakra into your cells that creates an advanced meiotic rate at all your basal layers. You're a very astute medic, aren't you? Tsunade asked as she slammed her hand on the ground. A neat trick, but my jutsu is better. Tsunade then slammed her hand on the ground as the seal matrix appeared beneath her, just as Orochimaru and Jiraiya did the same. Kuchio's no jutsu. And soon, the Battle of Tanzakugai would witness its legendary battle between three equally legendary people. There, standing in the age-old fashion of the great three-way deadlock, were Tsunade, Jiraiya and Orochimaru, accompanied by Gamabunta, Katsuyu and Manda. This was going to be another battle for the ages. Konoha. Sasuke was kneeling down and catching his breath. In front of him, Kakashi stood perfectly still, one hand holding a wooden sword. He had never pegged Kakashi to be a truly brutal sensei if he was serious enough. This style of swordsmanship is what the Anbu favor above all others. This is what made Itachi so agile and incredibly fast. It focuses on speed to perform the first strike in near-perfect precision. Any wasted movement becomes completely covered by the fact that you target weak spots like the neck, the chest, the head, and then some. The philosophy of this style is, one swift stroke, one simple step. With Itachi's Sharingan and this particular training, it was the perfect complement to each other. Supplemental to that, was Uchiha Shisui's very effective use of the Shunshin no Jutsu. Then it's no wonder that your brother would come out as a very gifted shinobi. Then he went to Sasuke and urged him to get up with a simple push of his foot to the boy's side. Now, get up. In order to perfectly understand this style, you're going to have to get used to being hit by it. You need to learn to defend yourself against me before I can successfully endorse you to the current Anbu commander. Sasuke did as he was told and used his wooden sword as a support to get up. Kakashi waited patiently as his student was up and looked to his right to see his shadow clone instructing Sakura now. Unlike your standard katana, these things are actually double-edged. So I can't teach you what I am teaching to Sasuke. However, I can teach you a far more different style than Sasuke's. Kakashi spoke while Sakura was sitting on the ground listening to her teacher. How different are the two styles, sensei? Isn't there only one preferred style that many of our shinobi use? And why did you have me practice with a shinai then if it would be practically useless in what you're about to teach me? Kakashi nodded. True, there is only one preferred style in this village. But different blades require different uses. Yours, for example, require a much more careful and methodical approach, unlike katanas that are less dangerous for users and much lighter to use. So I trained you with swinging a shinai to get acquainted on how to swing a sword, much like what I am doing to Sasuke. But for all intents and purposes, you two have different ways of thinking. A specific sword style then should fit for specific purposes for specific people. For example, your swords are double-edged, meaning bouncing your blade against someone else is likely to lead you to cut yourself and leaving yourself open. Of course, the chakra blades are much better because of its nature as a weapon itself. But I want to train you as if you were still fighting with a pair of short swords. To do that, I should brief you with the history of the sword style you are about to learn. Kakashi then grabbed the pair of swords from Sakura's small backpack and held the two glowing swords in both his hands. There is a pair of swords from Kurigakure that was held by one of the shinobi swordsmen of the mist. Her craft involved triangulation footwork, twirling her wrists to deflect or parry and perform devastatingly quick slashes in rapid successions with lethal force. Many who stood in her way were cut down to pieces. So brutal, quick and efficient were her attacks that it was said that those who tried to face her would ultimately fall into a trance-like state called Shinobudo, Dance of Death. I unfortunately never had the chance to face her, but I did get the chance to encounter that specific style in one of my missions. The user called it Yabana Okami no Sakebi, Cry of the Savage Wolf. Sakura nodded at her sensei's words. Learning a foreign style did sound extremely appealing to her just because of her curiosity and from what she could deduce, a complicated fighting style that her mind can sink its teeth into. Who knew Kakashi sensei, of all people, was actually a very astute teacher? I can only teach you what I have witnessed, Sakura. You're going to have to make do with what I have. The rest of its advanced techniques, you have to create and master on your own. Just remember the important key points that I'll be saying to you now. Grapple, disarm, strike, joint lock, and throw. Every part of your sword is a weapon. From the hilt, to the guard, and to the blade, there is no part of a weapon that can't be used against an enemy. This time, Kakashi had handed to her a wooden stick that was about the size of her arm. For this lesson, I'll teach you the angles and how you can hit in different ways, either forehand or backhand. But you must do this while weighed down on your arms to maximize your swinging speed. Kakashi then used a single hand seal, and Sakura was suddenly surprised that the weight of the small wooden stick suddenly increased. Come at me, Sakura, let's see if you can effectively learn this style. Of course, Kakashi knew that Sakura had the perfect mindset to learn this style, but the question remains, can she handle it? That would be something to discover. Outskirts of Tanzaku City. Nostalgia has a funny way to catch up to you once you realize who you're facing with. Gamabunta commented as he took his pipe and began smoking. Only difference is I get no awkward moments with the living leather apparel now that I can skin him for a nice wallet. I always wanted one since I met Manda. It would be nice with his head on a pike near the house too. Gamabunta said this with a hint of joy in his voice. After all the forced teamwork bullshit he had with the snake boss, he was finally, getting a chance to cleave his knife on the snake's skull. As a gesture of a disrespectful taunt, Gamabunta blew smoke to the snake summon's face. Watch your mouth, sewer toad. I should eat you where you stand for your meager threats. Manda hissed at the boss toad. The toad knew perfectly well that he relied more on his vision and sensing the air with his tongue rather than eyesight for this belligerent, pipe-smoking uncouth amphibian to blow a few wicks of smoke at him. That was a sign of disrespect and defiance against his authority, who was rightfully considered the strongest of the three summons. Gamabunta simply laughed at that. The only thing you're eating here today is my blade cutting your stomach. While the two were beginning to draw attention, a giant white slug had looked at its summoner and asked. Tsunade-sama, what would you have me do? Katsuyu, separate the boy from us and give her to Shizune. This battle is not meant for me to carry an injured child. Besides, Tsunade trailed off as she watched Jiraiya gather his chakra and began producing a sensory barrier around him. It seemed like the man was waiting for something. The seal on her forehead suddenly glowed and spread throughout her head and reaching down her cheek. Katsuyu recognized that Tsunade was not going to use Suzo Seisei, Genesis Rebirth, but rather her most powerful technique, the Byakugo no Jutsu, Strength of 100 technique. I intend to finish off this little meeting we have with Orochimaru once and for all. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.